Greetings, listeners. This is Justin Searles. I have started a podcast that is called Breaking Change, and this is the seventh version, the seventh Breaking Change. You might know that already if you've clicked play in a podcast player. In fact, come to think of it, that's probably what happened. It's good to see you. It's been a while. I'm a little sleepier than usual because I'm recording this at 10:18 a.m. on a Sunday that happened to be Spring Forward Sunday. And so I got up, I woke up at 7 a.m., which is later. Recently, there's been birds chirping, and sun's out well before then. So I've been up at 6:30 almost every day. And here I am at 7 and I'm somehow more tired. I don't know what it is about daylight savings time since moving to Florida. I'm sure that I was a fussy toddler when I was a kid. I'm confident, reasonably confident that I was a handful, a piece of shit, if you will. But most of my adult life, I haven't thought very much about daylight savings time. It doesn't faze me, what's 1 hour here or there. My sleep is typically pretty erratic regardless. But since moving to Florida, there is indeed something weird. It is so much more intense psychologically to see the sun go down at 5 p.m. here. I realize this is, again, Florida privilege stuff, but I am coming around to the notion that we get so much sunlight here that life here your brain rewires itself to revolve around the absorption of vitamin D through your various organelles in the skin. That when daylight savings ends in the fall and we have to fall back, I get so depressed. And I didn't in Ohio. I was sort of or in Michigan, I was just sort of humming along at a pretty static level of depression for most of the year because of how gray it was and how little sunlight we'd get for 8 months. But here it's so much more intense, even though on net, I'm sure it's much more sunlight overall. And so I wonder if I've come to rely on sunlight more. But anyway, yeah. So spring forward here is just brutal, which might explain why Florida's two senators, Senator Rick Scott and Marco Rubio, two senators that I normally don't really find common cause with on many topics. They are co-sponsoring a bipartisan piece of legislation yet again, or reminding the country rather, that just a year or two ago, they were able to pass it in the Senate by unanimous consent, which is a parliamentary procedure in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate, where you can just basically say, yo, this good. And if no one says, nay, then, or rather, if the president of the Senate, or whoever's presiding, my understanding is, I'm not a lawyer. I just watched West Wing too many times. But anyway, whoever's presiding over the Senate, they don't claim to hear a nay. They can say, oh, yeah, it was a unanimous consent. So anyway, this permanent daylight savings bill, which would basically just make us spring forward. Our next spring forward might be the spring forward home, to put it in quantum leap terms. Yeah. They'd make it permanent. The House didn't move on it. And maybe they will this time. I doubt it. There's enough, interests in other states. If you fall in the wrong or right border, and if you're at a certain latitude, there's this whole, I think, very old-fashioned notion of school schedules and farms and working farms and kids working farms. That is nostalgic and no longer really grounded in reality. But I would be a fan. I'm willing to give my endorsement to full-time daylight savings time forever, please. because I would be happier. And I personally support most legislation that would make me personally happier. Although more often than for somebody as self-centered and egomaniacal as myself, I do find myself aligning myself politically often against my interests for the greater good, or so that's what I tell myself. All right. So spring forward happened. I may be a little sleepy. This may be a long podcast as a result, because when I'm more tired, I talk more. Just, what's that Mark Twain quote, like, sorry for the length of this letter. I didn't have time to make it shorter. So yeah, you might find me being more verbose than usual. Life updates. Let's get right down to it. Well, the breaking change for this episode, I hadn't actually decided, because this is like one of the most chock full lists of shit that I've cobbled together. A little behind the scenes, a little behind the magic here is I have in my Things app, I have a carefully built project with all the sections of the show, and I add into the buckets like, life updates, follow-up, Aaron's pun, news, recommendations, mailbag, and I just keep on clearing those out with every episode and then dragging in new stuff. And then once the hopper gets full, I have a gland in my body that starts to feel irritation, and it's a signal to me that it's maybe time to release a podcast. And I was feeling that a couple days ago, and I was like, I think I'm getting close. And then I thought of like 4 or 5 more things I wanted to share, and so here we are. And so as a result, this for whatever reason, over the last 2 weeks, a lot of stuff's come up. I think if I was going to pick one, I would say that the breaking change is, I'll think of a way to phrase this later, maybe, is that websites sometimes close outside business hours. And that really screwed me earlier this week, and I'll tell you about that later. All right, so on to life updates. I was talking to my accountant this week about taxes. I don't know what he's a really nice guy, but I have never expressed very much interest in talking to him about other things. And so it was funny to me when we were video chatting. I hadn't seen him in years, because once you get into the flow with an accountant, unless you've had a big life change, there's just not that much to talk about. And so we typically only interface via email or maybe phone calls quick here and there. And once it's March, by the way, if you know an accountant and it's March in the run up to April 15th filing, or if they do a lot of corporate or high net worth individual, quote unquote, stuff, you know, they're going to be really busy basically September and October for the delayed filing, which, if you've got a lot of investments in, special investment vehicles that issue K1s that take a long time or issue a lot of corrections, you almost always end up having to delay. Like if you're like an angel investor, or if you do any sort of, complicated, sophisticated internet investing, it's probably in your interest to, internet or not, I suppose, it's probably in your best interest to delay your filing till later. And so now there's like a second busy season for accountants. So September. So if it's March, April, September, October, or anything around the new year, because if they do a lot of corporate returns, there's a lot of like year-end shit and start of year closing the books shit. So if it's those times a year, if I book a call with an accountant, I tell them up front, I will take less than 10 minutes of your time because you are probably working 60, 70, 80 hours a week right now. And even if you're billing for all of them, that you're not billing, well, I don't know. I don't know if you charge double right now. So that's my fear. So I'm going to keep this to a very short amount of time to save me money and to give back a little bit of your, life to you. because you're probably working too much. Because seasonal jobs like that, man, even if it's knowledge work, even if you're at a desk, I couldn't handle it. It's too much pressure. So I was talking to my accountant. Yeah, all right, I'm starting to come around to this idea that when I'm tired, this might run long. I'm really good at selling this podcast, by the way. Listen to this increasingly detached from reality middle-aged man just wander around. Boy. All right, I'm going to snap to you. I'm going to sit to attention. Talking to my accountant. What was I talking about? It was taxes. What did he say that made me write this into this note? I remember now. It's that he looked at me in the video chat and he's like, whoa, you look like you're about to start a podcast. And I suddenly was so afraid that my accountant, who's a very straight-laced individual, would listen to my podcast that I was like, oh, really? And eventually I caved and was like, yes, I actually do have a podcast, but I was very careful to not name it or link it or issue any kind of follow-up. So Brian, if you're listening, thank you so much for helping me over the years. Other life stuff. I love hearing from old friends. I don't hear from them nearly often enough. I feel, probably everyone feels this way, but I feel like I reach out way more than they reach out to me. I will just scroll through my contact list frequently. I've actually thought about building an app that does this, that'll basically contact roulette, and pick a person you haven't touched base with in a long time, and then just ping them, tell them you love them. Doesn't have to be much more complicated. Share a memory. So yeah, I had a rare instance of somebody actually contacting me from my K-12 years, and they reminded me that I used to do this thing with them and a handful of other friends called Bible quizzing. So I was raised in a Christian household. I have since fallen away into apostasy and heresy as a pretty atheisty atheist. But before I did that, I memorized numerous books of the Bible word for word so that I could, with a group of half a dozen, teammates, attend throughout southern Michigan, mostly southeast Michigan, once to Chicago, these tournaments where you would compete against teams from other churches and organizations. And this was such a weird ordeal. It was sort of like a quiz bowl, if you know Quiz Bowl, right? Like it's a trivia game, but you get those little buzzers. But this one, you would have these paddles that were wired up to a central box, and you had to jump off the paddle. And the first butt off paddle, first sensor to go, would get to complete an answer. And even though a lot of them were phrased as questions, typically my recollection is pretty much every answer was, or every question was phrased as a little bit of question wording, and then some beginning of a quote of a Bible verse or a passage from the Bible. And you would, if you know that verse, if you recognize as soon as you get the cue, you jump. And if you're the first one to jump, you would usually, higher order thinking wasn't happening. Not going to connect that to religion generally, but usually the kid would just spout off and finish the quote. And if you finish the whole quote, if you just go through and you just keep on reaming out, Ephesians or whatever the fuck, you'd usually get the answer in there. And so that's usually what kids would do. I, on the other hand, would jump and then earnestly think about the answer to the question. But then if your phrasing isn't literally perfect, you would get it wrong. So I was exceptionally bad at this. But my friends were my friends anyway. Some of them have become friends for life. And we've all gone on various adventures since then. This is the first time I've ever talked about my Bible quizzing days. I think I was middle school, maybe the first year of high school. I was real bad at it. I say I would memorize multiple books of Bible, but there were people who were so much better than me that literally word for word, chapter and verse would know, would go deeper. For me, I wasn't that dedicated. I I've since, spent a lot of time studying, how to memorize stuff better, like spaced repetition systems and other approaches for the purposes of learning Japanese. So I wonder how I might have applied that same level of rigor to this, of memorizing entire passages in sort of like non-typical English. If you're inside the game and you're curious, I believe it was all New International Version translation of the Bible, and it was. And that translation, man, go find a YouTube on the history of the NIV and the degree to which it represents a wonderful intersection of American spirituality with capitalism. Moving right along. On that note, I have no segue. I shipped that Stripe integration that I was complaining about over in version 6. I solved that problem with pausing subscriptions by just turning that broken feature off. So people will not be able to pause. Instead, they will be able to cancel, and then they will be able to resume. And that seems fine. I think it's because it's payments and because it's an integration that's new to me. I found myself reading a lot of code for the first time in a long time. Programmers often talk about, code is read 10 times more than it's written, so we should write it to be read. And maybe similar to how my mouth talks 10 times more than a lot of other people, that never rang true to me. I was like, I do not read code. I will look at code. I will get confused. I won't like it. I'll delete it all and I'll write it again. Or even as I'm reading code, I will just, like a person in a dark room groping around for doorknobs and shit. I will just adjust the code as I go and sort of just like, I'm going to pull this over here and move this loop around there. I'm going to do an extract refactor here, give that a name. And so if you tell me to read 100-line piece of code, it might take me first a long time because I'm not really good at reading code or in the habit of it. But I might change a third of the lines as I work through it. Sometimes style stuff or whatever. So yeah, I don't read code well. I never have. I'm much more prolific in writing it. And when I write it, I actually, in 2017, I gave a keynote at RailsConf called How to Program. And I actually, if you're interested, I detailed how my entire approach to programming is to make deletion part of the workflow, part of the natural life cycle is death, And so I designed my code to kind of be maximally firewalled by being minimally reused. And if you don't reuse something, if every piece of major kind of like functionality in your system is only called in one place, then that means you're free to just, as long as you know the contract or what it's supposed to do, just delete it, and build it again when the requirements change. And that way you don't wind up with a whole bunch of legacy shit that was just got like more mud slapped on it and ifs and elses and complexity and vestigial, parameters and dead code and so forth. So when I say I don't read a lot of code, I mean to say I spent a lot of my career figuring out methodologies for writing code that don't require you to read code, because reading code is fraught and shitty and stupid. Nope. That is not the official stance of anyone but me. But if you agree, please email podcast@searls.co. So anyway, I was reading the Stripe integration that I shipped, and because payment seems like an important thing to get right, I sent a pull request to myself. I'm the only person on this repo at the time. And I read all 5,000 lines. Like it was 2 weeks, and it somehow created a 5,000 line diff. So apparently I'm pretty productive. None of that was just generated nonsense. It was really a lot of code. Yeah, I don't, speaking of not reading code, I also don't really like pull request reviews as a practice. I'd rather people just collaborate and pair more and like reach a point of like shared understanding of the code base so that everyone's writing with the same authorial voice, just if like we were working at a magazine or something or a newspaper. And so I don't really even, this is the first time using like the pull request review user interface in GitHub in earnest in years. And they've really added a lot of shit to it. I don't know. I don't want to make a positive or negative judgment about that, but I did use it. I read through all 5,000 lines, and I appreciated the exercise. It was an interesting thing that I probably won't do again. Although I will say that, I almost always, when I do read a PR or read through my changes before I just go and YOLO deploy them somewhere, I almost always catch something while reading the code that I would have caught later. And catching something early is always better than catching something later, because you're never going to have as much context loaded about something you wrote than when you were actively writing it. So this is me maybe backing away from the reading is for suckers stance, which I realize is hard to defend. But it's, I was glad to catch a few payment related things. I don't think they would have resulted in making more or less money, but it's worth getting right. I'm winding up for another Japan trip. It'll be my 11th trip to Japan. My trips to Japan have, over the years, in the last 19 years, have varied from 13 days to 364.5 days. Speaking of the things we do because of taxes. And this one's going to be about 35 days. And the length of the trip matters a lot. We'll talk about that later. We got a good email about Japan tourism and how to do it right. And so I'm going to be there for just a bit over a month. And I'm super stoked, going to Ruby Kaigi, making plans. And Becky and I have an overlap. We're both going to be there for a period of a couple of weeks. She's going to go to Okinawa with me for Kaigi. I wanted to kick things off with some relaxation, with a nice little getaway with a trip, an intra-trip. And so when we're going from Tokyo to Osaka, I booked at a resort onsen hotel called Kame no I, which means, I guess, turtle well. I don't have the kanji in front of me, but I think that's what it means. Like a well, like a water well, but with a turtle in it. Or a well full of turtles, or a well owned by turtles. Japanese noun constructions are kind of ambiguous. So I don't know the etymology or the story behind the name of this turtle well resort, but I have found over the years that onsen hotels are typically kind of ryokan style, old fashioned nostalgia trips, even if they're new construction, they're kind of made up to look old, because that's the affectation that travelers want to see. Domestic too, it's going up to the hot springs is sort of a time honored tradition in Japan. So it's something that travelers expect. And it's also coincidentally cheaper to build and operate. Well, maybe not operate, but definitely cheaper to build something that looks old or is made to look old, because you punch a hole in a wall and it's that's just part of the charm. So I don't love that, because I like new things. I'm addicted to stuff that looks nice and I prefer modern aesthetics. Additionally, luxury hotels generally in Japan, anything that's associated with a Western chain at this point, is you gotta assume just triple, quadruple the price of what a domestically run Japanese hotel or ryokan is, or resort. Maybe inside the big cities, maybe they're all just going to be pretty expensive, because they can be right now with so much foreign tourism. Just foreign tourism in Japan isn't back to what it was quite in 2019. That was really unsustainable. But they've since COVID tamped down on the Airbnb market to the point now where it's sort of like New York City, where there's just not nearly enough hotel inventory. So the luxury hotels in particular, unless you're burning points, and you're using Hyatt points, where it's a tier-based system, so it's regardless of the market rate for a particular night, you're always going to be paying, say, 60,000 Hyatt points to stay at the Park Hyatt Tokyo. then that sometimes the points percent math can make a lot of sense. But in general, I would strongly recommend anyone avoid the like luxury brand or Western chain hotels in Japan, unless you really want to see a lot of, obnoxious foreigners for most of your experience. Foreigners meaning not outside Japanese people coming in. Outside people from outside Japan tend to dominate those hotels because the yen is really worthless right now. And so that's who they're marketing to. So I'd visited this one resort that I'm referencing, the Turtle Well Resort. I visited that before and really enjoyed it. I had a great time. I went solo. I booked a room and it was super modern. And I didn't even realize this, but there's 2 wings, a brand new building and then a somehow even more brand new annex. And I booked into the more brand new annex, which was a premium concierge selection. And so when I was checking in, which I was delighted to do, first of all, because it's a little bit more rural. It's off the beaten path. It's not shown up in any big guidebooks or anything. And you can't just take a Shinkansen bullet train and get straight there. You gotta figure out how to get there. It's not like Hakone, which is like a massive onsen town and definitely sees a lot of foreign guests visit. So for that reason, like it was, I'm trying to find a polite way to put this. Welcoming international guests can put an undue strain on the operations of Japanese businesses and cities, because Japan is a culture, like Japan's culture is one where everyone sort of meets a pretty high bar of social responsibility and not disrupting other people. And, you take care of your own trash. You don't speak too loudly. You don't complain unless it's really a big deal. You don't, don't make messes. Just stay out of other people's way. Defer to other people, even if it means denying yourself the thing that you want right in that moment. And if you're imagining what most tourists are like, it's their staff is very often very much overwhelmed because it's like from a service worker's perspective, the customer is God and they're doing their absolute best. But if systemically, the country only really works under a certain amount of demand for customer service. And my experience, especially traveling in Japan post-COVID, is that like staffing levels are still pretty low, and international tourism is just really, really straining the country's ability to meet that demand. So if I can get off the beaten path, if I can go to a suburb, if I can go to a resort that is not exclusive to Japanese people, but is marketed to them, priced for that market, it means I get to save money. It means I get to have a better experience because it's not overrun with loud, cranky people that are up. What did my professor in college used to call this? That he used to refer to this quote. I have no idea if he made this up or if he was referencing something a friend said or if it's in some old book. But my professor, Professor Hertz, he would say, foreigners in Japan are like water buffalo. What do you say? Trotting and pooping all over Japan's carefully tended garden of a society. And so he said it so many times that here I am 20 plus years later, and I still basically remember it. And it's something that I think about whenever I just see any amount of mess in that country. So yeah, this is a resort that meets those criteria. So it's cheaper. It's very quiet. It's super duper peaceful. It's beautiful. It's brand new. It's super well maintained as a result of, in part, no one making a big mess. And I get to practice Japanese, because they don't get a lot of foreign guests. And so their English isn't necessarily super awesome and they don't have a whole lot of staff. The luxury hotel chains will very often grab international staff from other properties to meet the language demand. So if you do, okay, I guess if you don't speak any Japanese and you want to be sure that somebody at a hotel will be able to speak English with you, yes, you would be better off staying at a Western hotel chain, because they're going to have people from other countries coming and doing certain amount of, 1, 2, 3-year tours of duty, or just relocate to the country. So that's true. But if you want to have like a authentic, peaceful, quintessentially culturally exchanging kind of experience, I would avoid it. So anyway, yeah, had an awesome time. This place was great. My little concierge room included a hotel lounge with like free alcohol, which is a very unusual thing in a Japanese resort hotel, especially because it was like an honor bar where they had like really high end shochus and local whiskeys. So that was cool. So we booked that. Becky and I are going to go. I had one real wild experience there. Should I share this story? Well, now I'm kind of on the hook. I had one real wild experience. If you're not familiar, if you've never gone to a hot springs in Japan, the custom of how to do it is a little bit complicated. First, most hot springs, which are just, you're not like going into a mountain typically. You're not like surrounded by an outcropping of natural rocks. Like what we're talking about here is they will drill into a mountain, sometimes like not as deep as you might think, to tap into a volcanic hot spring, because Japan exists on the Ring of Fire in the Pacific Rim. And then they will pump that water out. I've seen the drill bits. They're like oil drill excavator kind of bits. So they'll drill in, they'll build a pipe, and they'll use that pipe, and then not treating the water for anything other than, I suspect, that they reheat it. Maybe they don't. Maybe it's all natural. But when you see the plumbing in these places, it's like, man, that water travels pretty fucking far. I'm not sure it would still be the 41 degrees centigrade if they weren't doing that, at least. Then they get certified that this is genuine hot springs water, that it's been untreated. It'll contain whatever minerals happen to be in that region's, local geology. And they pump it into pools in baths. And maybe they have 3 or 4, 5 different baths, sometimes each with different kinds of water, sometimes with different temperatures, like a cold bath, a super hot bath, a medium bath. Here we're back to the retreating of water in terms of heat, at least. And they're very often then from there up, the nicer ones are themed. And then you get the the not so natural rock outcroppings and the cool water features and decorations and stuff to kind of give you this relaxing environment. But when you go in to a hot springs, you first, identify which of the 2 gender flags you should walk into, which is the nicer the place, because again, the motif that they're going after is like old timey traditional Japan. Unless you're going to a place that caters to foreigners, you just need to know that the blue curtain, usually blue curtain, with the kanji for man, is for man gendered people, and the pink, sometimes not pink, with the kanji for woman, is for woman gendered people. Excuse my lack of sensitivity around language, but this is a very much binary gendered custom. And when you walk in, you disrobe, you throw your clothes in a locker, you clean up however you need to or whatever. You get a little key usually. You don't know phones in here, right? You take your Apple Watch off. You go in, you take a shower. They've got these little kind of the shower buckets and the squatting showers and stuff. That's their own whole ordeal. And you fully clean yourself, and then you fully rinse yourself off, and you've got a bath towel and so forth. From there, you take you squeeze the soap and water out of the bath towel. And then you can enter the baths. And the next big rule that matters a lot is that you don't ever let your towel, which is dirty because it was just rubbing your dirty body, how dare you, into the water, because that would, taint the purity of the hot springs water. Presumably, this is assuming everyone's batting 1,000 from wiping the dirt off their body successfully, which is questionable. But it's an important custom. And so you don't put your towel in the water. Another custom at Cool Ryokan is they very often every morning will change the side. So the men's side and the women's side will flip because like the design might be different, you know, of the baths on one side or the other. And if you're the typical, I think the median onsen hotel stay is probably 2 nights, maybe even like 1.5 might be the average. And so very often people are just going to be there for the day they check in the next day. So give everyone a chance to try out all the baths. Typically every morning they'll swap the flags. And if you're up early, like I was, you might go in, you're the first person there. And I did that. So I got up early. I was only staying 1 night at this particular resort. I did the whole procedure because I've done this hundreds of times. And this side was really cool. They actually had an outdoor like patio door almost, and then a 2-story spiral staircase walk up and a beautiful view of an ocean bay. This is about 2 hours, maybe southwest of Tokyo. And it was gorgeous. And it was in the Izu Peninsula. It was gorgeous. It was so cool. It was beautiful because now I'm in a bath and I'm perched up and I've got this awesome view of the ocean. I got the fresh, brisk air, you know, I got the salt air, you know, that you're smelling. And I was just having a little moment, you know, as one does. The hotel was delivering on its marketing, its brand promise of chilling me the fuck out. And then all of a sudden, a young naked Japanese lady rushes up the stairs, looks at me, and exclaims, "Hey!" And then I damn my eyes and I turn away. Myself also being naked, but at least probably obscured by the water, thanks to refraction, which is what light does when it passes through water. And in surprisingly fluent Japanese, given the amount of duress that I was experiencing, as I was like, oh fuck, did I forget, or did I get the sides wrong? And I was like, no, because this is the side that I wasn't on yesterday, and that was fine. And so I very kindly said, you know, this morning, this is the men's side. They flip every day. And you probably want to be on the other side. And she ran downstairs in a huff. Not a huff, not an angry huff, but like and my next thought was, I just shocked this young woman so much that she's probably going to slip down these wet stairs and die. And then I'm going to have a really complicated week. But thank God she must use the railing. She got down the stairs successfully. And then all I heard was apparently she had a bunch of girlfriends and they all came in at the same time. All of them rushing to re-robe as quickly as possible so that they could do some sort of barrel roll and duck and roll procedure to get out of what is today the men's bath and into the women's bath. And they pulled it off. And, within 5 minutes, guys started showing up to this bath. So, you look at it from a certain way, and I did them a huge favor. Because I don't count because I'm just a silly foreigner. So that's a story, one of many that could have gone the other way for me. But man, it's always an adventure. So, in spite of that minor fuck up, I am extremely excited to go back, and to take Becky. It's a real nice one. Yeah. One more life thing right now. I'm still thinking, my head is stuck on the fact that I knocked the microphone with my hand and I didn't write down the timestamp, which means I'm probably not going to go back and fix it. So about 10 minutes ago, if you heard me and then maybe I said sorry and maybe I just kind of repeated myself, that's on me. Sorry about that. I was gesticulating, and so I think my hand just knocked the microphone around. Last life thing, I have another confession. I have a classist, outmoded view around streaming audio. I don't do SoundCloud. I don't do YouTube Music. I don't even do Spotify. I did Spotify when I was in college in 2005, and it was like Sweden only, and it was free streaming for pretty much all music. This is in the post-Napster, mid-LimeWire era, probably Kazaa. You could use a VPN or use Tor with a Tor exit node into Sweden, and then you could stream from Spotify pretty much any music. So in 2005, I was a big Spotify user, but then between them like starting to charge for money and all that, I just went back to, you know, the comfortable embrace of Apple land. And so I've been using Apple Music ever since. And I have found I'm the weird guy who liked Apple Music from the start and have had mostly great experiences with it. And as I've kind of transitioned over the last 5 years to mostly listening to Japanese music for the purpose of kind of getting some amount of language immersion just passively throughout my day. And then, of course, you know, you listen to a lot of music, then you become accustomed to it and so forth. I like Apple Music, but when it comes to instrumental music and like especially lo-fi hip hop and the 8,000 variants of what I'm sure are almost half AI generated at this point that dominate, you know, hours of streamed and screwed up I'm sure all of the royalty math and the contracts around how these streaming music systems were meant to work. Apple Music kind of just sucks at this. Like I'll pick out a lo-fi album that I really like. I listened to this one really good Zelda one. And I was like, oh, great. And then it'll do the kind of infinite play and it'll pick more music. And then after that album is exhausted, it'll pick another good few 3-4 tracks, which is not long enough if I want to work for 5 hours listening to music. And inevitably, it just careens into like mumble rap, trap bullshit that I don't. Hey, if that's your thing, go with God. I can say that phrase because I used to do Bible quizzing. Fuck. I'm so sorry. If you're offended by any of this, hit pause. You know, I will consider it a rejection of the terms of service and then then unfollow. But if you're in for this, I'm here to tell you, I have finally given up on Apple Music for idle work tunes. And the reason that I did is I can just in Vision Pro throw up a YouTube player and play some lo-fi shit, and then it'll go on autoplay mix afterwards and keep picking out good shit. And it's such a tighter recommendation. Like the field of recommendation is so much narrower that if I want to listen to like old retro gaming, but lo-fi-ified, it will go from that Zelda thing to Animal Crossing to, you know, Mario or Skyrim lo-fi or whatever it is. And Apple won't, even if the music isn't Apple. So, you know, despite my, like I said, classist Apple supremacy in most things and platforms and looking down on people who use YouTube as a podcast player. By the way, Breaking Change is a podcast available on YouTube because I know you exist and I want to be available. And it was just like 5 clicks to make that happen. Here I am putting in the 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours of YouTube music. I don't know, like, does this play ads for people? Like I have YouTube Premium because it's expensive, right? It's like $20-$30 a month, but I got enough people in the family that I don't feel super bad about it. If there are ads on like lo-fi music streams, then holy shit, how does anyone get any work done? But if you got YouTube Premium, you know, or if there are no ads, I don't know. It's a good time. So here I am. That's a life change. It's something I'm still working on. I only came to this realization that like, oh my God, I've become a YouTube music person in the last day or two. And I'm still struggling with that. Okay, well that's enough. That's enough about me. Let's talk more follow-up. That's what's next in this list. Yes, now that I've given you a behind-the-scenes tour. So follow-up next in the list. First item, progressive web apps. So in version 5, I talked about Apple deciding to just take their ball and go home with respect to adding websites to the home screen in iOS, which would allow you to open an app, a website in a full screen app-like interface also known as a progressive web app. If you're not a web developer, some sites will just still open a shortcut to Safari, and some sites will go full screen. The full screen ones, the developer just put like a little tiny tag near the top of the HTML that tells the system, hey, I know how to operate like an app, make me full screen. And then there are various additional hardware features that they can use from there. Apple said, oh, hey, sorry, EU, but if you're going to make us add support for third-party, web rendering engines like Blink from Chrome and Servo or whatever the hell Firefox is called from Mozilla, we have to remove the progressive web app feature because JavaScript can do like just-in-time compilation stuff and a whole lot of other deep and gnarly technical optimizations that are not otherwise allowed at all in the Apple SDK. Like they're the equivalent of using private APIs, but it's even more detailed than that in terms of just to make a modern web browser performant. The amount of engineering, you have to get real, quote unquote, close to the metal. And so Apple's argument was, well, we can't figure out how to do that, and we're not going to invest the time to. And additionally, it could create gigantic holes for users. So as a result, we're going to just take away progressive web apps entirely. People got mad. The EU said that they would look into it. And then Apple modified their decision. And everyone, I think because they didn't understand the difference between adding to home screen and having like a link out and adding to home screen and having it be a full app, and didn't understand the difference between a full, the WebKit rendering engine, which renders every single website view in iOS and iPadOS right now, versus a third-party rendering engine like Chrome's. The backtrack was simply, okay, we're just not going to make that change, but it doesn't mean that they're going to like allow Firefox and Chrome's rendering engines to be used to power progressive web apps. And notably, progressive web app support in WebKit has always been pretty jank. It's gotten better, but Chrome, if they were able to power progressive web apps on the platform, they could continue to invest in that API to the point where, like, one could imagine. Now, most people on the internet are like kind of not taking Apple's side here, and understandably. I could imagine a future, though, where Google is able to ship progressive web apps, have a store, charge money for the store, have those things installed as web apps. And because there's just enough hooks in the hardware from a, what an app can do perspective, like apps can access the camera, apps can do this and that. If you're providing the rendering engine, then Chrome could either add to the spec the proper way, using the various standards bodies to add additional cool shit that progressive web apps could do, just completely bypassing Apple. So Apple wouldn't have a say in, now the hardware can be, like, I don't know, access Face ID, or I'm trying to think of examples, use the NFC reader. And basically, if like they could make it, Google could also go off script and just add their own custom proprietary, manifest entries and header tags and shit, or JavaScript APIs that only work if you install a progressive web app with Chrome, and basically just turn it into effectively an Electron equivalent for iOS that totally bypasses Apple's App Store. At that point, like, given how many apps are currently React Native apps anyway, and then which are then cross-compiled into something kind of like Swift, and even though I think that they're a pain in the ass to maintain, they mostly look and feel like shit, lots of people are doing them. Why would you go to that trouble? And now this is, again, only EU specific. But if it became a thing, and especially if it became, a thing in America or worldwide, you'd have a real hard time arguing to make any native app at all, because Google is here and like basically shipping, probably at that point, you imagine 3, 4, 5 years down the road, now that progressive web apps as a platform could make sense universally with like one of the juiciest demographics. The irony, right, of like the whole Google versus Apple thing is that Apple customers, from a marketer's perspective, are the most valuable. They spend the most money. They tend to come from higher socioeconomic status. it's a luxury good, so that kind of makes sense. It's priced as a luxury good. And Google, as an advertising business, wants to maximize its access to that audience, even if it means at the detriment of other audiences. That's their incentive. And yet they own Android, which is typified by demographics that are not that. And so one way to look at the last 3 or 4 years as progressive web app technology and standards have sort of stagnated a little bit is the juice really worth the squeeze if progressive web apps aren't truly going to be able to be delivered to juicy, rich targets of iOS users? But I could totally see 3, 4, 5 years down the line. Now it's like Google's building a full, framework for building progressive web apps. They're really investing in it, and as an alternative SDK, so to speak, for not just iOS apps, but apps globally, including every single possible hardware hook that any application could access. But then, because it's a rendering engine, even more additional rules don't apply to rendering engines or can't be applied to rendering engines because, like I mentioned, to have a JavaScript runtime that is performant, you need access at a much lower level and some sort of entitlement or allowance to use a JIT, a just-in-time compilation, which is not allowed at all in the App Store. And because it counts as a private API, even under the other EU rules, wouldn't be allowed. So I suspect Apple saw that, and then they're like, okay, and so play it forward just 10 more minutes. And now what happens? Like all of China, if China were to ever follow the EU's regulation here, all of China would just, the WeChatification, where you kind of launch WeChat, and then that app, which already has several, I think, hall passes from Apple. Instead of you being on the Springboard home screen in your iOS and you click into WeChat, which then has its own Springboard of its own app ecosystem inside of that. Now it's just the whole home screen could just look like an Android screen effectively for that really massive market of effectively unfettered, full-blown apps that just happen to be progressive web apps and totally bypass Apple from a gatekeeping, security, of course, financial payments perspective. I suspect that's why Apple was not going to just give that away. And so everyone was excited about the backtrack, I think, because it's just internet points. People have the tribal affiliations. They have a vibe check of, they support open sounds good or whatever. And it does sound good. In general, but at the same time, it's where I stand is Apple, maybe I just carefully tended gardens of a society, but Apple made a really nice thing. It's a nice experience. They made it on the Mac, right? I love using the Mac, but then Electron comes around, which allows you to write basically a web page that has all of the accoutrement of a real application by giving you a JavaScript API to set up what the menu bar should be and some other kind of right click and other kind of native features. Electron has taken over so much of what it means to use a Mac that it's hard finding actual Mac-assed Mac apps. In fact, that phrase exists because the existence of open pathways provide a path of least resistance to businesses and app makers where they can hit a broader array of targets, Mac, Windows, Linux, by shipping Electron to all three and just having one common code base for all of them. And that means that the experience, the niceness on Mac OS is pretty much a lowest common denominator in a lot of ways. I would hate for that to happen to iOS because already too few people are making good iOS apps, and to give an even easier out, or even to make it even more financially unviable to make an avant-garde bespoke iPhone app and then also have to figure out other clients separately. It would relegate native iPhone apps to apps that Apple makes and games, which are, barely games typically on iOS as it is. They're mostly just, in-app purchase digital casinos that target people who have a predilection to getting addicted to that shit. If you know any good iOS games, I'm going to mention one later. If you know any good iOS games that counter this, let me know. But like, it's a fucking nightmare. Just how powerful these devices are and how much worse the games available are because there's so much money to be made just on free to play, slot machines for kids that are legal because they can't pay out money, right? Which is sort of weird. Anyway, yeah. So that's the progressive web app update. Yes, indeed. Apple did backtrack, but because they're not going to allow third-party rendering engines to own that runtime when you've added a website to the home screen, I think it's really just they went back to exactly where they were before. And people were celebrating as if it was like a big victory for Google or whatever. I don't think they read very far or they understood the dynamic. So I figured I'd mention because 4 or 5 of you reached out and told me about that. So nothing really changes. I am glad that, Kame-Same, my Japanese language app, is it's a progressive web app. It's actually meant to be used that way in iOS. And so it would really be a shame for anyone based in the EU to not be able to use it that way. So that's good. Another bit of follow-up. Oh, Vision OS 1.1 came out, as well as a Mac OS, some number, 17.4. I always struggle to keep track of. No, 14.4. Doit. The Mac OS numbering is so tricky because then they also put out a name and then I forget both. So yeah, Mac OS 14.4 came out. Vision OS updated really fast. And then my Mac took like 45 minutes, like it sometimes does, to install the Mac OS update. That's the price of being more open, I guess. And I was still working when the update started installing, so I just set my MacBook aside and I was like, I'm going to use my Vision Pro without a Mac connected to it. And holy shit, it's not very good. I'm kind of back to where I was 4 or 5, 6 weeks ago, where I'm like, man, this is this like. I feel like I'm using an iPad through interpretive dance. Typing is such a pain in the ass, and dragging stuff around, everything's just so janky. And without a keyboard and a precise pointing device, like, man, it was a bad time. So I don't know. I ended up using Siri a lot. That's how you know it's bad, is when it's like everything's such a pain in the ass just to kind of like manipulate basic things like Windows, that you end up using Siri to control stuff or to open things or to dictate. I'd be like, you know what? Rather than, awkwardly pinch my thumb and forefinger, which I don't know if it's just a sensory experience or what, like just really skeeves me out doing that, the viscerality of it. I will just tell, Dingus to please open the App Store and search for this thing in the App Store. And it's fast. It's good. It actually works fairly well. But if you're using that assistant as your primary way to drive a computer in the year of our Lord, 2024, it means everything else failed. So yeah, I got a recent and then 15 minutes later, after getting fed up about that, the Mac was done. I started again. I was back in Mac screen sharing mode, and the Vision Pro tiddly bits were once again limited to throwing a YouTube up to play some lo-fi music or some DJ track. All right, that's all I had to follow up today. Not a lot of follow up. We've got a new pun. Part of the promise of this podcast is Aaron Patterson, aka Tender Love, provides a customized, just for you, special pun for each episode. He iMessages them to me in invisible ink so that I will not have to spoil myself to the pun in advance. I try to give him a prompt because coming up with a pun unprompted, it can be challenging, like it's like saying, think of something on the spot in a high stress situation, suddenly all the ideas fly out of your brain. So I gave him a prompt. I said, I know he's traveling. I said, hey, maybe about travel or State of the Union or just pick whatever topic. The President Biden gave a State of the Union address last week. Some people watched it. Only 5% of the people watched it who were under the age of 35, as one would predict. Here we go. Oh, I should preface. Aaron says, not my best work, but I'm beat. So he was tired. Let's go easy on him. Here we go. My feet really hurt from walking, so I've decided to switch to meters. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to sip of water. If you didn't catch that, that was, my feet really hurt from walking, so I've decided to switch to meters. Boy. So yeah, instead of using your feet to walk, you're using meters to walk. And presumably that would get you 3 times as far. I'm going to copy paste this. I said I should be kind. I'll be kind. All right. So today's date, March 10th, 2024, version 7. My feet really hurt from walking, so I decided to switch to meters. And now I got to rank it. I think I found its spot. I'm going to place this one as slightly better than. I'm excited about Vision Pro. I heard spatial computing will be out of this world. But not quite as good as, aren't progressive web apps just liberal media? So again, this is, number 5 on the list of 7. So it's, what's that? 18th percentile. Last time, version 6, he had his number 1. I'm really glad Americans are finally embracing tap to pay. It was real touch and go there for a while. So, they can't all be winners, Aaron. You'll get them next time. So thank you for that. Let's, now that the pun is out of the way, let's get into the news. News/main section. If you want to be hyper specific, not everything that I have to say in the news section is always technically newsworthy. Usually if it's not, it's because it's not recent. I remember taking a journalism class in college, and I learned the 4 rules of newsworthiness. And I feel like one was local, one was timely, one was relevant. And I don't remember the 4th one, but I'm going to assume it was like clickbait. The first one is actually timely. Here I got an item. Vision OS doesn't have a lot of apps and it has even fewer apps that were anything more than an iPad app with like a slight redesign with native controls. And then here comes Sandwich. If you don't know what Sandwich is, Adam Lizagore and his team, they build commercials and they deliver them on the web. And I first started following them, I want to say late 2000s, because they did a video for 1Password that I thought was really clever. And Adam has a tremendous presentation style. He's very deadpan, direct camera. And the videos that they do are produced at a filmic level of quality. Sandwich makes commercials. And here they are, releasing a new app under the developer account called Sandwich Vision. And the app is called Television. So I'll share the trailer, his YouTube video pitching it, because assuming most of you don't have Vision Pros. And this last week, I got an update where you could play YouTube videos in Television. But the app itself is, I think, a marvel because it hits on the charm and the sort of whimsy. Whimsy is the right word for early days iPhone App Store, like when you started seeing, there's iBeer, where you tilt the phone and it's like, oh, I'm drinking a beer and stuff. And like those were, I think we should make fun of them because they're silly and there's no need. And Apple made a bunch of rules for like there's a certain threshold of utility. But the whimsy is totally missing from the Vision OS. There's just, you get a kind of half-assed Fruit Ninja port, right? And you swipe the watermelons. There's just not a lot of like apps that embrace Vision OS as a spatial thing. It's like, yes, it is spatial to take an iPad-like window and put it in front of you and resize it. And then have that stay in the same spot even if you walk away and come back. Much more interesting is the idea of, share play. So shared experiences around the same common thing. So multiple people see the same thing. And what's more, spatial is taking 3D meshes and models and allowing the operating system to texture and light them and give the user the ability to resize and shape and place them in their space. And that's what Sandwich did. So television is an app where you can take any of dozens of kinds of televisions from their catalog of televisions. They've built 3D models of them. Old timey ones, CRTs, little ones on stands. And boy, it's great. You take the television, you put it there. You can put it big in front in the middle of you. You can put it off to the side. And given, as I just shared earlier, that I like to have a YouTube playing music on the side as I work, I've got a little coffee table to the right of my chair. And I just put a little silly portable television, just like my grandpa had. He had a little 1-inch black and white television. This one's color. And it's probably more like 4.5, 5 inches. And then I would, you can drill in and select, you can with 2 fingers, you can resize and kind of rotate, which is a gesture that I have not really seen anywhere else in Vision OS. And that just goes to show how few apps really take advantage of any of the gestures apart from scrolling and iPad-like idioms. Yeah, so I threw, you can click in, you can drill in, and then once you've logged into YouTube, it can slurp YouTube, but you click it and then it'll use the embed. It'll look at the video code and the URL, I think, and put it in as an embed and map it onto the CRT or whatever virtual television that you got. And it's very cute. It's just charming. That's what it does. Yes, you could just use Juno, which is an app that Christian Selig, I think, the fellow who made Apollo. It's like a proper, Chrome free, like just a floating window that will play YouTube's. But what's the charm in that? So if you're if that's what you're after, I think television's really cool. You should check it out. I'll share that link. Other stuff. Since I talk about Apple stuff a lot, I've gotten a couple emails recently saying I talk too much about Apple stuff, but I don't know. Okay. More Apple stuff. So I purchased an M3 MacBook Air, which wasn't a thing when version 6 of this podcast came out. So Apple did a press release announcement for an M3 MacBook Air. It is a speed bump. It is just like the M2 MacBook Air. One difference is it's cheaper than the M2 MacBook Air, starting at, I believe, $1099 USD. The M2 slots in now at $999 at the start of the lineup, which means the M1 MacBook Air goes away. As is right and good. When Apple went to the numbered M series of chips, which I predicted that they would do because they seem to, as a supply chain oriented company, once a product design is locked, they seem to really like to be able to just roll at a TikTok sort of, cadence. And even though their branding and their naming is very often nonsensical to us, and plans change, and the lineup at any given time, like if you look at the iPads, the iPad lineup is currently in a state of nonsense. The Mac has really pretty clearly settled into a predictable set. It's clearly pretty close to where they want it. You've got a 13 and a 15 MacBook Air. You've got a 14 and a 16 MacBook Pro. Now, would I like a 12-inch MacBook Pro? Then you got the 12, the 14, 16. Yes, I would. So, Tim, if you're listening. So the M3 MacBook Air, it's a speed bump. It's 15% faster across the board, same battery, same everything else, same hardware. M3 includes like a lot more, much better GPU. So it's like 20-25% on GPU stuff. And it's the neural engine, quote unquote, the AI zone because the CES this year was all like every laptop maker just tacking on the word AI to their product. And Intel admittedly did roll out a processor with like an AI co-processor, which is now commonplace in the ARM chips where you have like, the, did Google just go ahead and call them like tensor chips, whatever Google's special chips are, for its Pixel phones, Qualcomm's chips. They all have these AI co-processors that are just because the math that you need for a lot of AI language model stuff and deep learning, machine learning stuff is really like a lot of matrix math. And so it's very, very easy to chunk up and scale with pretty straightforward silicon. It's becoming more nuanced, but it's got more AI juice. The only other real change, because of the AI juice, it has voice isolation now in the microphone, which is, maybe something you like. It's probably just I assume, software thing. It's also, if you get the midnight dark blue, don't call it black MacBook, it's now anodized with the same, one presumes, the same anodization seal that the newly released space black MacBook Pro is. So that'll look nicer, catch less fingerprints, one would hope. As a greasy Italian-American man, I'm all in favor of things that make my grease appear less prominently. I have a feeling like my grease is going to beat this anodization pretty quick, but I'm over it. This is a part of me that I'll just say living in Florida has not. I exist through a membrane of either my or Florida's moisture. It's how I interface with my environment. So yeah, sorry, that's probably a little gross. Just oily skin. What are you gonna do? It's just, like I said, this is all there really is to say. Weirdly, because I have a problem, the M2 MacBook Air might be the longest I've had a Mac since like 2012 or 2013, maybe longer. Because what I do is I'm never fully satisfied with whatever Apple MacBook laptop I have. It's either too heavy or too loud or the battery sucks. And rarely is the problem that it's too slow. I honestly don't care that much about that. Although I will pay for speed updates because I know that if I get a faster feedback loop on even a web page loading, but more specifically on like a test run, then I will get distracted less often, and that is worth a lot of money to me professionally. So yeah, my MO is Apple releases a new MacBook. I project my hopes and dreams onto that new thing, and then I trade in the old one, or I sell the old one, or in the 5 or 6 years where I was still seeding hand-me-downs to everyone else in my family, I would hand me down an old one. So yeah, I ordered it. I honestly, like, for getting a really well-spec'd MacBook Air, I got my specs in front of me. Here's the configuration that I picked. 8-core CPU, 8-core GPU. There is a 10-core GPU variant, but the 8-core GPU is already faster, and Macs don't have games. So who cares? Save a couple $100. But I did spring for the upgrade from 256. Oh, wait, no, that's my trade-in device. Oh, well, shit. I basically spec'd it the same way. I'm curious. Do I want to go into apple.com/order status? We're doing a live, folks. I screenshotted the wrong computer. Now I've got my finger over my Magic Keyboard, which has a Touch ID. Oh, my hand's too greasy. Touch ID is not working. Oh, that finally. 4th time's the charm. Surprised it let me try 4 times. I have a MacBook or a Magic Keyboard that is, I can't see. It is mounted with Velcro to the back of my monitor because I don't want to see it. It is there strictly to be a Touch ID sensor. So that was an expensive and stupid thing to do, but I did it. All right, what do I got here? Oh, apparently I'm getting the 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU. That sounds, I don't, all right. fine. 16 gigs of memory, 8 is the default. You know, I'm not a big RAM person because I actually avoid Electron apps and I don't use Chrome, but 16 is nicer than 8. So I would go for 16, sure. 8, I would feel it maybe, but 16 is plenty. I mean, here I am currently recording on a Mac Studio with I think like 96 or 64 or some ridiculous amount. 512 gigabytes of SSD storage. That's the other important one. I struggle with SSD storage because if you're like me and you've got the iCloud drive turned on and you've got it turned on for desktop and documents, and I keep I keep my dot files in iCloud, which as a developer means that sometimes like Vim takes a long time to launch because it's got to sync files from the cloud to find my like editor configuration. Not ideal. Don't necessarily recommend it. But once your local disk can't hold your entire iCloud drive, it kind of doesn't matter how much storage you have because it's like always going to be ejecting all of your files into the cloud pretty aggressively. And so my 8 terabyte Mac Studio can actually hold everything locally, all my photos in my iCloud drive. And the reason I spec'd it up to 8 was I didn't want to have to deal with an external drive or something in order to be able to have a full representation of my whole Apple Cloud ecosystem on device so that I could then use Time Machine or Backblaze or Synology Sync and know that what I'm backing up is not a pointer to a cloud file, but I'm actually backing up the real files. Just in case iCloud ever disappears or whatever. But if you're not able to get literally everything on the local disk, at that point, it kind of doesn't matter how much disk you have. But I still think, it's similar to 8 gigabytes, just feeling a little bit tight. Even with 512, I'll still sometimes have downloaded a bunch of files in a folder that doesn't get ejected, or have an issue when I'm doing something like a video export and there's just not enough free space. And I'm playing the Daisy Disk game where I'm like looking around and trying to find things to delete. Since there's no user interface for telling the system to eject files, it's sometimes it's like a waiting game of like, well, hopefully now that the drive is under duress, if I just like leave it plugged in for a couple hours, Mac OS will figure out that it needs to delete some shit. And when you run out of when you run out of storage now, it's such a terrifying experience because apps will stop working and you will have basically no recourse. Because everything that measures, every third-party app, Apple's own stuff that measures how much storage is being used, isn't telling you the full story and isn't giving you a lot of control over it. And as I've moved more and more stuff into iCloud Drive, I don't like the experience of literally running out. So 512 is enough to avoid that. The other big decision point, 35-watt dual USB-C port compact power adapter, as opposed to, could have also chosen for the same price, a 70-watt power adapter that can fast charge the thing to like half in, 20 minutes or whatever. Since I'm rarely in a hurry, I just picked the dual port. Maybe I'll travel with it. I usually use little GAN chargers from Anker and stuff when I'm traveling because they're smaller and lighter. But maybe I'll actually use this. I can always use more power, USB-C power plugs now that everything's finally USB-C. Well, my goal isn't necessarily to share every single Apple purchase with you. I get it. I do talk about Apple shit a lot. I follow it closely. I'm a hobbyist fan person of Apple's products and have been for most of my life. Why I mention it is it's like I look at the M3 MacBook Air announcement release and it is what it is. It's like, I don't need to read a review. It's a speed bump. And if you've been following technology for more than 15 minutes, you know that like typically what happens is modern computer design is similar to car design, where every 4 or 5 model years, they'll do a refresh of the design. They'll change the shape of the vehicle. They'll change the layout. They'll substantially swap out components, maybe upgrade the platform that it's based on. And the incremental years between those big refreshes, it's mostly just tweaks and minor adjustments. Computers are the same way. M2 MacBook Air was a brand new design. And so no one should expect it to get another radical new design quickly. And if you don't like that design, you shouldn't expect them to deviate quickly. The design, the work that goes into it, the machining, the supply chain, like it's all just too much work to be worth redesigning the entire computer every single year. And, you know, the car industry took a long time, took them 30, 40 years to figure out that it didn't make a lot of sense to redesign the entire car every single fall from scratch. That like it actually made sense to work incrementally and improve iteratively. That was like D.W. Deming's first real foray into, you know, influencing the industrial economy. And so that's why I'm slightly familiar. Anyway, I bring it up because people have been weirdly cynical about it. I was listening to the Vergecast, the podcast that The Verge puts out, and I just don't understand. Like, maybe they're just scoring points with people who, you know, if I was a platform agnostic tech journalist, it would be really boring most of the time to just keep saying every year the Apple shit across the board is better than all the other shit. And if not, where it's not, it's also not worth violating ecosystem supremacy. So yeah, even if some earbuds are better than the Apple earbuds, like for 1 year or 2 years, it's not worth the hell that would cause your life by losing the ability to instantly swap the device between different devices or have the other kind of like privileged operating system access that these have, and so on and so forth. And that would be boring. And additionally, because like, you know, there are plenty of Apple specific outlets, you're going to attract a lot of viewers and readership that are like, you know, foaming at the mouth and having sort of like the console war sort of like, you know, fanboy bullshit. So I get it that they are they operate in a world where they at least have to play at everything being pretty dramatic or competitive or a game, or, oh, well, now I'm switching to this laptop from Asus or this one from Acer or this ThinkPad, or like, you know, yeah, generally the MacBook Air is the best one to get in. Like, I get the world that they operate in, but like in the context of like a single discussion of this one product, the same individuals on the panel would say that the design was, you know, that the thing was too similar to last year's model, but also that it wasn't different enough. Or they'd say like the loss of a wedge shape, because the M1 MacBook Air is the last one that has a wedge shape, which I think was a great design physically, because you could pick it up out of a bag and know which side you're holding. Because if it had that taper, like which side of taper, my hand could identify that. You know, I didn't, and then I could orient it on the desk without potentially getting it wrong to open the clamshell. That's a great design. I get why people like the wedge. It's also aesthetically pleasing, but like if it also means you get 30% less battery, then like I don't know if that trade-off's particularly worth it. So they have people mourning the loss of the wedge because the M1 falls out, and then like, oh well, how dare they drop it out? It's like, well, what would you rather them do, right? Like have just M1 and M3 and have everyone who buys a new computer get this other like at the cheap, because of the cheaper price point, just like have it like stop working in a few years when it stops getting operating system updates. Like it's bizarre to me how little patience people have for just it. You know, I don't want to dwell on this. It's not that important. It's just, you know, sometimes a simple little speed bump is just a speed bump. Like, there were years where the same people were complaining that Apple would go several years without a speed bump in various products, even if like, you know, a new chip from Intel was available. They'd still keep selling the old one longer than they could have swapped it in. And here we're getting speed bumps, and now people are complaining about the speed bumps. Anyway, it reminds me of, I think it was Bill Gates. I pulled the Bill Gates quote up so I could say it, but it's a common refrain that I hear from lots of people, is that we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. So the nature of incrementally improving a design is that year over year, it's pretty fucking boring. But if I take my iPhone 15 Pro and then I compare it to where I was 10 years ago with my iPhone 6 or 6S, yeah, it's pretty goddamn better. And it's physically extremely different. Lots of small lessons pile up over time. And, if I get it, you're a tech journalist, you're talking about something like you're trying to keep score and you're following the horse race of each vendor versus all the others and all the different platforms and stuff. And you're trying to help people make informed decisions about what to buy. Like, these aren't designed so that people can be dummies like me and upgrade from the M2 to the M3 to the M4, trading in the old one. Because like I didn't mention price, but like mine specs out to like $14.99 retail. But because my old one is 18 months old and just the M2 and they're still selling it, Apple gave me like $705 in trade-in credit. So it's really like it's $800 for almost 2 years of laptop for me. That's, if it was a rental, right? I'd pay that. And so that's how in my brain I justify constantly swapping out these devices. Yeah, I don't know. I wish people had a longer view of these things. Now, it's totally okay if a product shows up and it sucks or it's just not there yet, like to point that stuff out. Like one of the things about this MacBook that people are mad about is the M2 MacBook and the M1 MacBook errors. They could only do one external display. And I think everyone kind of gave the M1 display or the M1 chip a pass because it was so much faster in all these other ways that it didn't have the display controllers to pump out 2 external displays from a laptop. And the M2 had the same limitation. And the M3 had the same limitation when it came to the new 14-inch MacBook Pro that doesn't have the Pro branded chip, just the regular M3 chip. That one at launch could also only power one external display, and people were fussy about that. But like, also, these chips are not the product. The product's capabilities are the product. And if I'm Apple and I'm trying to decide, do I make this chip perform faster by making it better at the core thing that it does, because a chip is a chip, it has to be computationally powerful? Would I rather make it a little bit more powerful, or would I trade that space on the die to add a capability that is one of the key differentiators to help guide customers to understand the difference between the consumer grade capabilities of the device and the Pro? Because like, in a world where all of our computers are fast as fuck, like you have to draw the line somewhere. And sometimes Apple does it in software, right? Sometimes it's pretty clear that the Pro phones are doing stuff with their cameras that you probably could have done on the non-Pro phones if you'd put your back into the software. And it's sort of a software gated bullet point feature capability of a device, which feels scummy. No one likes how that feels. And here they are literally saying, for the base M2 or M1 or M3, we're gonna dedicate that extra die space to making these computers even more badass at being computers and just faster, and that means that'll translate directly to longer lifespans and better performance for the people who buy them. But nerds on the internet who have 2 monitors that they want to plug in, they will get mad because they're saying, well, how dare you tell me I got to buy a Pro? It's like, well, first of all, you are a nerd on the internet who wants to drive 2 monitors. Like, that is a very small group of people. And if you can't afford the next rung up in the product line, then I think what Apple is implicitly saying is you should question your priorities. Either you don't really need to drive 2 external monitors, or you need a better job, or you need to be less cheap. Like, they're not going to solve the iron triangle of resource management for you. That's up to you. And so, yeah, it's okay to whine about it. But like, especially if you're an accomplished journalist covering this stuff, playing into that is sort of silly. Because yes, you talk to a niche, but like, let's be real. If Apple can identify a legitimate hardware differentiator between classifications of product that make some kind of sense and are grounded in reality and no one really loses, then yeah, that seems good. So anyway, one of the defining features of the M3 MacBook Air is that you can now drive two displays from the MacBook Air, only this new M3 MacBook Air, and then they're backporting it with software to the M3 MacBook Pro that came out last November. And you can keep the lid closed and you can drive two displays. But if you open the lid, the display controller gets rerouted or something through the magic of how the video controller works in firmware. And one of those displays will turn off, and then you'll have the built-in LED of the MacBook Air pop on. It's cool. Apple did it. It was something that they could solve in software. They already had, because the Mac Mini can drive two displays. There's no connected one. So like they did the extra work in the firmware, and that's good. It didn't require them to like dedicate extra die space on the chip and make that sort of trade-off. And then the very next thing, after pointing out that this is a new capability, the same kind of, and this is not just this podcast, it's other podcasts and stuff that I was reading this week. The same people will like praise that they can do that, but then immediately suspect it won't come to the M3 MacBook Pro, even though 2 hours later Apple confirmed it would. Or they complain, oh, well, this isn't really a solution because it's like only when the shell is closed. And like now you're telling me that in a roughly $1,000 consumer entry level laptop, there are people who need to drive two external displays and have the lid open, and so three logical displays of real estate in their screen. Like, if you really need that and you aren't a real time, Wall Street trader, I don't know. Like, if you're a programmer or something, like we program very differently. I work really well on just one screen. I jack up to like 24-point font. I want to focus on one thing at a time. So maybe it's just a style thing. But if you need three screens for a legitimate purpose and you can't afford the mid-level upgrade, then I don't know what to tell you. So people were complaining immediately, like, oh, well, now it's only when there's claims. I don't know. Like, there's just no pleasing some people, I guess, is the moral of the story. Another bit of news. Something happened. So kamesame.com, I'll link out to it. Its website, I intentionally don't have a marketing page for it because it's free and I didn't want to like push it too hard. Tens of thousands of people have used or are currently using, I don't really have much analytics on how many, have been using this Japanese learning app that I wrote in 2017, 2018. It's a flashcard app. It's what, it doesn't matter what it is. All I know is millions of people, or not millions, there are millions of flashcards being learned on it and tens of thousands of people who use it. And there's a little Patreon. It costs about a couple $100 to run on Heroku. And so the Patreon's just enough to cover that. So everybody wins. I don't think about it. I have not committed to this thing in about 2 years, which means like a lot of dependencies are out of date. And I have a latent stress of like when dependencies get out of date, the longer it goes, the more work it's going to be to fix. And I ran into something required me to pay attention to this. I don't remember the initial reason that I was looking into it, but I looked at the sort of the hourly, daily, there's a daily batch process. Is it daily? No, I think it is hourly. Yeah, there's an hourly batch process that updates everybody's, it downloads the latest dictionary, updates the dictionary, it does a whole bunch of stuff. It like for new words that get added to the dictionary, it goes and runs to AWS Poly to have those synthesized in AI voices so that you can hear the word as spoken as you do the flashcard. It also goes to another real application that's a real product that makes money from Tofugu called Wanikani, and it'll sync your status there so that Kamesame can promote flashcards for you based on what you know over there. And I have an hourly batch process that started taking more than an hour. And if you've ever had this experience of running scheduled jobs at a computer company on day one when there's no usage of an app, that process might have only taken a few minutes. But then you go away for a few years and you come back and now there's a lot of users and you realize, oh, so by the time that this finishes at the end of an hour, it will have started again in another process. On top of the same servers handling load for the actual, like, what we call transactional traffic into the site over HTTP. So now I've got like 3 things potentially hitting the database pretty hard all at the same time. And when that happens, it can have a cascading effect if your servers aren't provisioned to handle that much traffic. Now, like, maybe that additional batch process doing all that heavy duty stuff simultaneously with the first one, combined with the web traffic, is just enough to, say, run out of RAM. And now when you're memory starved, everything gets really slow because they're swapping out to disk or waiting for garbage collection before you can continue operating or whatever it is. And so I think, like, I was right on the bubble of that happening. And I could see from the logs that there were like an increasing number of Postgres deadlocks. And I was like, well, here we go. So what I wanted to do was just change it. So instead of syncing everybody's status with WaniKani every single hour for the rest of their lives, it would only do that if you'd logged in the last 15 days, or if the app had seen you be active. Totally reasonable. And it would have probably taken this back down to 15 minutes. I downloaded the app onto my MacBook Air. My soon-to-be departed M2 MacBook Air. Had never used it on that device before. I try to get set up. I do the script setup. I always have a folder called script in every project I start, and I always have a setup script and a server script. And the setup script, the promise I make to my future self, is I will run that, and it will have all the commands I need to work. But it didn't work, because I was on Node.js version 18, which is not even the current stable. And I was getting all of this encryption, crypto, clearly open SSL, like out-of-date errors. Long story short, it was very clear that Webpacker, the Rails tool that like will bundle up all your JavaScript for you, and was the kind of, I think, not the golden path, but like a prominent, one of the 2 primary options several years ago to deliver JavaScript and even CSS onto the web, if you're doing Rails. Tool called Webpacker wraps it up. It's a Ruby gem. Webpack is the JavaScript. And I updated all my dependencies. I updated every dependency that I could, and it still didn't work. So I'm like, well, did they just not up? And so I finally go to the website, and a Rails guy says, Webpacker has been retired. And I was like, well, that sucks. I wish literally anyone had told me this. I don't know when it got retired. I don't know if there was, an announcement. I don't know if there was a deprecation timeline, but like retired means it's not going to work anymore. So like there's no upgrade path. You're just on your own. And there's a new gem, JS bundling Rails, that you can switch to and continue to use Webpacker and use a supported version. And it's got a great guide, a really well done guide overall for like how to transfer. So I found myself going through all of that stuff, and it was pretty miserable. And it made me, it was about, if Becky's listening, I recently told her it was going to take me 2 hours to do this one feature. And she was like, you sure about that? You sure about that? I don't want, because like she's my product owner. She's like, I don't want you on some like Kame-Same adventure for a week. We got to ship my thing. I was like, hey, hold on. I am the captain of my own ship. This is only going to take how long I say it. And here I am, and have spent several hours just on this step to get the fucking app running. So she wins this round. I look back on the JavaScripty portions of my career, and I kind of fell off the boat. I spent a lot of time promoting JavaScript testing and taking JavaScript seriously and building tools to help people write simple single-page apps with a minimal amount of complexity, both as a developer experience as well as in production. Simple things that would take a whole bunch of scripts, concatenate them into like one nice thing, gzip and minify them and so forth, and allow you to deploy them and have a pleasant experience, even if you have a separate app running, like CLIs and testing tools, and gave around give dozens of talks and meetups and stuff. But somewhere in like, I don't know, whenever React.js became popular, 2015, 2016, and Babel became the like preeminent way to like transpile or compile what the future of JavaScript would be into just the JavaScript of today that would run on browsers, because people were so eager to embrace the future, or it was a prerequisite to so many things people wanted to do, and to polyfill the current. It created this era that I knew was going to be transitory to a certain extent, of anything that was built with JavaScript between like 2014 and 2021 is just a fucking rat's nest of contradictory configurations of builds that polyfill or will replace real working APIs that browsers now support with, you know, kind of janky custom alternative like implementations that may not be performant or may not keep working forever, in the sense that the dependencies are now abandoned, and so upgrades won't work, and you'll get trapped on an old version of some upstream dependency or of Node.js or whatever. And here I am, and I'm just thinking back to a time when I gave a training, and I did it in CoffeeScript, and the guy running the training, he got the feedback like, "Hey, CoffeeScript's old news. We shouldn't be using this anymore. You know, Babel and ES6 and the future of JavaScript is all this other shit, and Webpacker is one of these kind of tools. Webpack rather." And I gave into peer pressure. I was like, man, I feel bad now, because my thing was working perfectly well, and I was really happy with it, and it was joyful, and it was simple. And I gave into the sense of shame that I felt getting this kind of feedback. And I was very on Twitter at the time. And so the fact that people were talking shit about me on Twitter, and the fact that that training performed really badly from a financial perspective, and you know, my reputation was harmed for sure in that community, because I wasn't a hype monster of whatever was next, even if, you know, there was a lot of like TBD on how to make things sustainable, or how to think beyond what a toy app needs, or how to think, you know, a year, 2 year, 3 years out, what to do about having so many dependencies that might be abandoned. No one wanted to ask those questions. Instead, they wanted to focus on, are you on the new hotness? And I wasn't. So I felt bad about that. And that's how Kame-Same wound up with Webpacker and JavaScript, like of that era, and a complicated, a relatively simple build, but relatively simple in Webpack is still absolutely complex. And even now, it took me hours just to get it up to the latest thing that will bundle Webpack still. But it's still tied to Webpack. Like, I can't get it to, like, you know, just modern standards without all this build shenanigans. And I'm not going to spend that kind of time, because the app is near the end of its life. I'm not going to keep investing in it, so it's not worth it. But I had an emotional experience thinking through this. I really thought, like, man, you know, I hope that I've grown as a person, or at least I can take this experience to be like, if I've got a simple thing that works well for me, and I'm minding my own business, and it's not necessarily indicative of where the future's going, but it's so low dependency that, like, as long as I am here, I'll be able to take good care of it, and without needing somebody else, or without getting super lost. I spent so much time with GPT-4 asking it questions, and it was almost as if GPT-4 was like, look, man, when it comes to this topic, the world is a mess. No one knows what they're doing. All of the sources of data that I was trained on are just script kiddies who felt like they were drowning because they'd installed Create React app, and then, you know, after a few weeks it stopped working. And then they panicked because React is the future, and their job depends on it. I can't help you solve this configuration issue, because there are 45 different answers to that question, and none of them were accepted as answers on Stack Overflow. So good luck, have fun. So GPT retired. It exited the conversation. It wasn't that dramatic, but it was, you know, if AI is able to express discouragement to you, you know shit's pretty bad. the complexity, the Rube Goldberginess of it all reminded me of one of my favorite work memories, which is something I was just chatting about with Becky after trying to relay how much of a pain in the ass this all was. I worked at a financial institution that shall remain nameless as a consultant very early in my career. And I was doing optical character recognition software, an implementation of it. I wasn't doing the hard science of that at the time. For they had a fleet of 5 or 6 $70,000 Kodak scanners. And the scanners were big. They looked like PT Cruisers without the front part. They're just big systems, and there's a violence to seeing something slurp up 5,000 pieces of mail. And they had a minimum wage worker whose job it was to keep it fed, right? Keep those pieces of mail, you got a different department opening up the mail and kind of shaping it so that it can go through the scanner. So I was building Scantron sheets basically, and then programming those Scantron sheets so that they could send each document, each piece of mail into the right department. And they had 4 that were at that main kind of processing facility. And then they had 1 that was at the mothership, which is where the white collar people worked, where I'm sure that they had a box of latex gloves for people so that they wouldn't get their white polo shirts dirty. The primary mail scanning facility was it was a rough business. I mean, the consumable parts, the little wheels that just feed in the documents, those would wear down weekly. The amount of just ink that would smear on everything, multiple times a day, you'd have to open these things up and scrub the ink and the detritus, and people send shit in the mail with goddamn Band-Aids on it, just you see disgusting stuff. The mothership had one too. It was much lower volume because it's not where the mail went. But there was one more of these scanners, and it was in legal. I was told it was used by the legal department, but no one could find it. And it's not like these. I guess if you had a $70,000 scanner that was bought today, it probably would have some sort of GPS or some sort of tracker. But there was no way to tell, because they were not networked devices. So even IT couldn't tell me where would it have been plugged in. It was because it was plugged into a computer somewhere over, I'm sure, some serial port. And I went on a hunt for this thing and finally found it. And it was in a room. No one really knew the story. It would have been set up and forgotten about. I was told a story of how this came to be, that in response to Sarbanes-Oxley, the post-Enron collapse legislation, the financial reform, some lawyer at this firm decided that to cover their asses as a financial institution, they couldn't do a distribution check without printing the check, even though it was all digital. So because they're moving money around electronically, they still needed the paper check and then a scan of the paper check to be able to have their boxes checked. And they checked. And this is all there because Sarbanes-Oxley was such a boogeyman. So I walk in, and sure enough, I'm looking at this Rube Goldberg machine of a printer that is positioned ever so slightly to shoot checks as they're printed into this scanner, which again, imagine the back half of a PT Cruiser, which is a vehicle from Chrysler that no longer exists, but did at the time. And it just kind of arcs a little bit. There was a little bit of a slope, they modified the ramp. Goes into the ADF, the automated document feeder, and then it would come out the other end and be scanned. So success. And then that would go straight into a very large shredder. So it would just sort of the lifespan of these checks. It was like watching a David Attenborough documentary where you're watching the salmon jump upstream, right? It's just you see them go out the printer, through the scanner, and then do a little hop and dive into a shredder where they are then eviscerated. The only thing that was missing from this, the only thing sadly, it didn't close the loop. It would have been cool if from the shredder, the paper was reconstituted into printer paper to recycle it so that it could be printed again. So that would have been much more, I think, eco conscious. That is the level of buffoonery that I always felt about Webpack around, not React the library, which seemed like the correct solution as a framework or as an algorithm to the wrong problem, which was how to build single page apps at scale in that particular way. But React as an ecosystem of people just grabbing everything that they can. It's like walking through a grocery store and just grabbing every third item from every shelf and throw it into your cart. And then when somebody raises an objection that like maybe this is going to create complexity for you later, like how are you going to pay for this or fit it into your car or organize it later or figure out, like what you're going to do with all this shit or deal with the fact that like maybe even though you threw 3,000 things in your cart, you forgot milk and you can't make anything. That you can't have this, and what you decided you want was cereal, right? And you get home and you realize like I've got 3 carfuls of shit and not the one thing that I need. That is how the JavaScript world came of age as an economic force to be reckoned with, as a cross-platform way to organize engineering organizations. And it is now a legacy. It is now a lot of people are looking at that and they're seeing that that was a dumb way to do stuff, but it's not being replaced by steps backwards or what no one ever wants to feel like they're going backwards. They would never be like, oh, I guess we should just go back to Rails or traditional .NET shit or whatever we were doing before. First of all, because most of the people in the room weren't there then, because a lot of those people are gone now, because this is an industry where so many programmers enter the industry every few years. It completely replaces itself in terms of the number of people. So now we just have this culture of, it is defined the culture and there's no real clear off-ramp. We have not people using Next.js, which is just the next generation of, it's like a lot of the same fundamental problems, except it's backed by a single vendor. So great. It's the most open solution. It's the open way to do things, except now like we also have this very awkward financial coupling to this one particular company. And if they go away or if they turn the screws, then we're kind of fucked. Anyway, there's a reason that I've gone back to just doing vanilla Rails and trying to stay on the blessed Rails path as much as possible over the last 4 years. Speaking of the Rails world, Ruby on Rails, David Heinemeier Hansen, also known as DHH, wrote a blog post that I will share the link to. He is playing with Windows, having used macOS for a long time. He actually, one of the first memories I have of seeing video of DHH was in 2004, 2005. Apple actually cut an ad. I think it was just a YouTube ad or a video ad on their website or something at the time, as sort of like a case study of look at these developers using Macs. And so like Ruby developers were the first mainstream US community of programmers who are using Macs, and Apple knew it and Apple promoted it. And DHH was a big part of that because for people who have taste, who like nice things, who appreciate an attention to detail and a curated experience, there's a reason that there's a lot of Rails programmers who like Apple products, who like theme parks, who like Japan. Like, it's not just the nerd subculture. It's like that Venn diagram has an intersection at give a shit about experiences and detail and caring. So anyway, David's trying out Windows. He doesn't like the font rendering. And he says, oh, I know this is a minor thing and I shouldn't care. Well, or something like that. But that's exactly the sort of thing that typifies Windows. Windows is very capable now. It has a whole, the Linux subsystem. It's got VS Code, which is what I'm using on my Mac, right? Another Electron leak. VS Code would be 1,000 times better if it was a Mac app from a usability perspective in a lot of ways. even though that's literally unfeasible as I say that. So when I tried to use Windows in earnest, I got a Surface Pro 4 in some number of years ago. And I wrote a scathing Medium post about it. Actually, DHH quote tweeted that one, kind of talking about how Microsoft had their heads up their asses. And this is why, Macs are better. But in my experience, and I still use Windows as a thing to launch PC games with and very little else. For me, it's the acceleration curve of pointing devices, of mice, or of trackpads. It feels almost one-to-one. It feels like there's just no real acceleration there, whereas Apple has spent so much time dialing in, especially their trackpad software, into feeling like you're moving the window as opposed to scrolling it. And Windows, it just feels so unnatural. So say what you will about Vision OS, for example. Like Vision OS is like not good yet. But in terms of like the I keep coming back to the word visceral today, the viscerality, like it feels like you are interacting with something that exists because the physics are right. That is a level of attention to detail that Microsoft has not demonstrated in Windows and still doesn't. And that Google has not demonstrated in Android. I use Android. I start scrolling shit with my thumb. It's the primary means of interaction on a phone screen. And like touch feels wrong, multi-touch feels wrong, buttons don't feel like buttons, and the scroll sucks. And I'm like, this is how 70% of the world lives? Or people will tell me like Android and iOS are like the same fucking thing. It's like this both sidesism. I was like, no, like when I'm on an iPhone and I'm looking at an empty page and I scroll to the bottom of the page and I get that little satisfying bounce back, like those little touches are what convince my brain that I'm interacting with something real. And if I don't have that, then I'm a guy using a computer. Like, so so DHH is using, I joked that he announced it's the, finally the year of, Linux on the desktop, because the reason that Windows is suddenly usable for him is it comes with Linux on it. I think he's also using Android. So we'll see how it goes. I don't know. I encourage everyone to go try out of their comfort zone, try new things. And then as soon as you have a bad time, start a podcast and bitch about how much you hate those bad things. It's at least content for the grist for the content mill, so to speak. Yes. Oh, David, Linux. Finally up on my breaking change here. This is, I realize, a long podcast. Uh-oh. Did I just make a long podcast? And then will it keep getting longer? The more people complain about the length of the podcast, the longer it gets. That's my decision. It's just so weird to me because like every gaming podcast I listen to is 3.5 hours long. I know I've said this 4 times now. And I would have them be longer because I just do chores mindlessly. I hope you're taking a walk. I hope you're enjoying your day. I hope you're changing out the filters in the vents that your HVAC system, if you're fortunate enough to have central air, whether that's heating or air conditioning, and you're sitting down, go stand up, ask yourself, when's the last time I changed those filters? And then if you have the filters, go change them. And if you don't, then go on Amazon and find some cheap filters or some nice ones. I don't buy nice air filters on Amazon because they're probably fucking fake anyway. Filtrete. But it comes and it's got like an accent over the E. Go to Home Depot or Lowe's. I don't know what the fuck. Just if you're getting stuff done and you're listening to a lot of podcasts, then you can pause it. You come back to it. Nothing we're talking about here is high stakes. And that's the reason is you can come and go. It's like AM radio used to be. This is slightly less political. Although I did endorse something that 2 Republican Florida senators said, which is I would be far more alert and awake right now had I gotten an extra hour of sleep. But the status quo, the do nothing Congress, Doesn't want you to get sleep. In fact, Becky was driving this morning, mentioned she almost saw somebody get T-boned. Which that is to say, you know, a car hitting another car at a right angle such that, like, you know, potentially a driver or a passenger would be directly hit by the front of the other vehicle. If you're not familiar with the term T-boned, it's not like a sex position yet. You know what? Rule 34, don't say something like, you know, definitively is not a sex position. By saying it's not, it just became one. It's like that book, that Don't Think of an Elephant. Now, here we are, everyone. So, Becky saw somebody get nearly in a really bad accident today. It was like 8 a.m., not even. And I reminded her, like, this is one of the deadliest days on the road in the morning because everyone who has to get to work had one fewer hours of sleep. So be careful. Too late to give you all that warning, but hopefully you're still with us. So the big topic du jour, there is a system in Japan for reserving Shinkansen bullet trains. Not every bullet train, mind you, certain lines, certain ones, but one of them does the Tokaido-sen as well as many of the other JR bullet trains. And it's called Smart EX. Smart EX had, for the longest time, just a website. You would go to smart-ex.something something, and it would redirect you to JR Central, which is the division of, or the corporation underneath Japan Rail that is, I think, based in Nagoya, or is the central area. With all of these, like with the internet, it's really confused Japan, where they had a lot of like regional privatization of a bunch of businesses and services, and then realized that, like, if we're going to have an app, we need like one of these broken up companies to actually be the one to own the app, because otherwise there won't be continuous service for everyone. I suppose with a train company, like they got to figure out how to make the train go from A to B, regardless of like the boundaries of which corporation owns that piece of track. So JR Central has a web app called Smart EX. You can go and create an account. It is Japanese only. It's been Japanese only from the start. And so you have to be able to read Japanese well enough to fill out a form. You also, I believe, to register, need at least a Japanese phone number, possibly also a Japanese address. And there may even have been some sort of verification of that, like an SMS challenge. But I signed up while we lived in Japan, because I signed up for all the accounts that were like that while we were there, while I had a real phone number, because you can't just get a phone number that receives SMS messages unless you're a permanent resident. So I signed up for all these accounts, but it means that, like, when I get locked out of one of these accounts, I can't reset the password, because it'll be like, all right, we're going to send a text to this Docomo number that you unplugged 4 years ago. So I get worried whenever I have to log into one of these. So I wanted to log in because I'm looking at pricing for Shinkansen rail over the Golden Week, and the areas surrounding when we're going to be in Japan, to try to understand, should I buy an all-you-can-ride rail pass while I'm in the U.S., which is a thing. If you're overseas, you can buy a rail pass that gives you like 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks of unlimited rail riding on Japan Rail. Or should I buy a la carte as I go? And so I went to Smart EX to check the Smart X. Should I just call it Smart X? To check the prices, and my login failed. And I remembered the last time my login failed for this. I was with Aaron at a Yakult Swallows professional baseball game. I said professional there because the Yakult Swallows doesn't sound very professional. But get your head out of the gutter. It's referencing the birds, and also Yakult, the probiotic yogurt beverage, is the sponsor, so they get the naming rights. We were in the stands, and I had to book a bullet train for the next day. And so while, between plays or whatever, Aaron and I were sitting on our phones, and I went to log in, and I screwed up where while I was logging in, iCloud asked, hey, do you want to generate a new password? And I clicked OK. But it was because the form for the login was rendered incorrectly, and it was actually the login form, not the create account form. But I clicked slightly too fast. I didn't expect to see that prompt, and then immediately realized that the password to the service was in my iCloud keychain and I had just overwritten it. And I go into the passwords. Excuse me, I just hit the microphone again. I was gesticulating once more. I went into the password prompt or password manager in the settings app. And sure enough, the new password's there, the old password's not. And even though they've recently added family sharing of passwords and passkeys, which is, I think, all very lovely, it doesn't store password history. So if you change your password on a service and the form submission fails, congratulations, you now are locked out, because it'll have saved the new password and not given you any way to go back and get the old password. And if you go and open up another device like your iPad or whatever, it's all an iCloud keychain. The minute that you open that device, because passwords don't take a lot of storage, you're going to see it disappear before your eyes. And if you're on a Mac and you restore from backup somehow and immediately turn off Wi-Fi so it can't sync, maybe you'd be able to get it. But when you're traveling, I was hosed. And so I was very fortunate because I happened to have, with this domain redirect shit, I happened to have an extra password entry for the other domain that you get redirected from, and that one was right. So I was able to save it, because the reset instructions for this particular web app are so asinine. They're like, what's your name? They ask you all the registration questions, like what was the mailing address you registered with? What's your email? What's, and then on top of, I think maybe an SMS challenge. I don't know. But like I kept failing those challenges because I couldn't remember, was my name in half width characters or full width characters, like multi-byte to double wide characters, which is not going to get into Japanese typography here. Or were they in hiragana or katakana? Like all of this is always up in the air. And then of course I try 3 different combinations to answer these questions. I get locked out. And so now it's just like straight up the message in Japanese is just like, the go fuck yourself, you're locked message. So I'm thinking like, all right, so I'm going to like go to the station tomorrow and try to like talk to somebody about this app issue. And they're just going to say, okay, where's the phone? And, or where's your residency card, which I didn't have. So that happened again, except here I was in the States and I was trying to just look at prices and I got locked out. But I typed in the right fucking password. And so then not to say I panicked, but I was like, well, maybe it was just the website. Maybe the app works. I heard, like, I saw some Apple App Store icon there, and I went to the App Store. I downloaded the new Smart EX app, and I was blown away, because by Japanese standards, for to have a native app on iOS at all for any kind of service, no matter how important, is quite impressive. But to have checked the box to allow it to be downloaded in regions outside Japan is like even more amazing. I have a Japanese iCloud account just for the purpose of buying shit in the App Store, onto my US region device. But here I downloaded the Smart EX app. It's actually localized. I mean, some of the localizations are hilarious. Like instead of remember me in the login, it says like retain membership information. Yes, I would like you to retain my membership. I downloaded the app. It's localized into English at first. I log in there and it says, please use the app that you registered on. I didn't understand what that meant. I'm like, this is the app. And thinking that meant I was locked out again, I went through the new user sign up. I was like, I'll just make a new user account. Maybe my account literally disappeared. That happens sometimes. A common thing I've seen in Japanese web applications is like 2, 3, 4 years of dormancy will just result in your shit getting deleted. Or, and we see this too, right? Like, oh, we've changed our membership system and you got to go re-register. So I thought maybe that was it. So I register for a new account. Give it all my information. It's a 15 fucking step form, because of course it is. And it was hilariously translated poorly into English. And I get to the very, very end. I give it my Amex card. And then at the very end, it says, oh, this card is already in use by another account. And it kicks me all the way back to the beginning. Do it again. Do the whole thing again, this time with a different card. And it's like, oh, this email is already tied to another account. And at this point, I was like, all right, well, it's like a 10-minute form. And so now I've blown a lot of time on this. So I went back to the computer. And I was like, I'm going to try to log in again on the website. I log in again. And this time the auth tells me that the account is locked. And it hadn't been clear in the past. It was like some sort of just like it's some sort of failure, like just a generic login error previously. So it says the account is locked. I reload the page. I try again. And now it logs me in. I log in successfully, but it's clearly broken. Like I can see that the login was successful, but then everything on the site is like broken. It's like something's getting shut down. I'm struggling to communicate. It was the site was in some sort of flux where like it was. I logged me in, but nothing worked, and I was seeing weird errors here and there. So I did what one does. I was like, this tab, I'm going to just assume that there's session storage and cookie and caching bullshit on this tab. I'm going to open a new tab. I'm going to try this again. And as soon as I did, it was like, yo, just, I tried to log in. It's like, hey, we're under maintenance until, 5 a.m. Japan time, JST. Funny that spring forward is something I was talking about today. Japan has one time zone. So at the time, that meant 3 p.m. our time, I think was 5 a.m. theirs. And it was at this moment in time, like 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Eastern. And this is, it wasn't an exceptional maintenance. You go to the homepage and it'll say, hey, here's the maintenance days for this month. And it's most of the days. And that's because you might not know this, but a lot of Japanese networked applications operate under similar rules to, I guess, the best analogy would be like the stock market in the US. Like I know after hours trading is a thing now, and there's other trading networks, but like, in New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or S&P 500, the only time you can really buy a stock is, whatever it is, whenever they open. Is it 9 to 4 or whatever? I'm not a big stock trading guy. And if you want to buy something outside of that, you have to go and find some broker or some other, do the after hours stuff where you're maybe changing hands, not through the market. That's the best analogy I can think of for how it feels to live in Japan and be like on a train at like 10:59 p.m., get off the train at 11, realize that I screwed up the fare and I want to adjust it. And while I'm in the app to do that, or the website to do that, it's just like the website turns off because the train stopped running at 11. And so like, it's not because there was a database upgrade. It wasn't instigated by a particular need of the system. Surely they have their batch processes too, that I'm sure used to take an hour. Now they take 2 or whatever. And I'm sure that they choose to run those sorts of things overnight. But there is a concept in a lot of Japanese software. It's less so now. Just in many ways, they're just, perpetually 5 to 10 years behind the like modern standards of web application and application development and software generally, because there's a long history to that I won't get into through no real fault of anyone's. And other than just general Western hegemony. But there are entire categories of apps, and they tend to be the ones that are more important, like the ones about healthcare and utilities and transportation, that will just stop working outside business hours. And it's very frustrating, especially when you're overseas, when you need to use those services. And that basically means you have to like wait until 5 or 6 p.m. to be able to use these services. Again, with time zones, like I wonder whether or not in the US, anyone would have had that idea and we would just start turning off websites overnight or on the weekends. Had America only had one time zone, because by spanning multiple time zones, and not just the big 3, but also Alaska, Hawaii, and whatever the fucking islands and I guess we got some Atlantic time zone stuff, I'm sure, some territories or whatever. Because of that, this was never a thought that could have occurred in a U.S. North American based, software developer's head. But in a country that has a mostly distinct engineering heritage, where a lot of countries, they don't have like their own kind of like big successful software industries, and so like the software that they have is the software that we foist on them anyway. Entire countries where internet access and computing are synonymous with Facebook specifically, because Facebook was the first ones to really roll out any kind of network access. I don't know if that's still true, but it's true in some places for a time. But I think it's interesting to think about, right? Like if we all were in the same time zone and it was 1996 and we were making the first, networked services that lots of people would use, might we have thought like, oh yeah, this bank site, just at 8 p.m., we just turn it off, and then at 8 a.m. we turn it back on again, or 7 a.m. we turn it back on again. Like, there's a certain quaintness to that thought and entertaining that thought. Like, well, customer service should be allowed to go home if somebody has a problem on the website. We want to be able to help them with it. And we don't want to incentivize ourselves to have to staff overnight or anything, because that's no way to live for the people who work, again, in this one and only time zone. So I can totally see how this would have happened, but it's just like example number 85 of the fact that Japan exists almost as a natural experiment of ways that you could do shit from an industrial design perspective, infrastructure perspective, or here in like software perspective of like something that I thought was completely like just a given, a constant, an invariant approach or an invariant trait of software was that, of course, it's just going to be always on because it doesn't cost, other than electricity, that it's actually easier just to keep the server running than to bring it down and bring it back up again in many cases, especially back then. So I love having that little light bulb go off. Like, oh yeah, you could totally turn off a website every night and just have it turn back on again and have it map to when you're able to actually properly support it. And of course, we can't do that now because our expectation, especially as like Western-based software users, we would never abide it. We're too used to the convenience of being able to do anything whenever we want. To say nothing of like, the fact the times, whatever. Like, I'm not advocating that we do this, but I think there's something about the notion of exposing yourself to a different way of doing things that is not for the cultural reason, not for the necessarily like engagement with like other people or, like a, hey, kumbaya, we're all humans bullshit. That has its place. But instead for just I think that it contributes to the plasticity of a mind to be challenged with information that violates things that we thought were invariant, based on the assumption that that's just the only way I've ever seen it before. So that's one of them. Sometimes Japan just turns off websites or apps overnight. Another, and it has merits, I suppose. I would much rather it just be 24/7 for my own selfish sake, because that's what I'm used to. Then again, I also would go to the market every day and spend 2 hours just shopping and schlepping food, in my bike or walking back and forth to my house when I lived in Nara. Whereas on the flight home, I was literally using an iPhone to make a Whole Foods delivery order that would be on my porch the minute that I got back to America after a year abroad. And I was like, oh man, America is so much more convenient. It's just it's a value that we have that I, kind of forgot about after 6 months of not having it. And then, I miss going to the market. I miss the level of community interaction. So that makes me more amenable to allowing myself to bask in thoughts like, what if we just had more software that was closed on the weekends? like the Stripe developer Discord is. What might we gain in that, even though it would feel like a loss? A less defensible difference, and part of why this took me an hour to sort out, is I learned in the process that the iOS application, which is the multi-region one, its account system is 100% separate from the website one. If you created an account on the website and you tie a credit card to it, and then you try to log into the iOS app, it's not that it was just down for the night. It's that the iOS app has an unrelated account system. They do not talk to each other. The branding is the same. There's nothing clear on the marketing or the App Store. The App Store reviews, it's all over the place because people run into this. So I just, in my hurry to try to figure this out, assumed that I was logging into the same service on the website as I was in the app. And indeed, that might be the first time that I've ever seen something that was branded as literally fucking identical between web and app. I'm so used to the idea that the native app is just either a skin or a alternate client talking to the same exact backend. But here's another invariant that was challenged. Now, I don't know that anyone benefits from this one, but the iOS app and the web app just don't seem to fucking talk to each other. And from what I can tell, the iOS app is not super good based on the reviews at stuff like reserving tickets or showing the tickets that you bought. So I'm probably just going to stick with the web for now. Forever. I mean, it's the primary platform, but so those are some thoughts. And I guess that's the breaking change. Sometimes your software is closed for business outside business hours. Interesting idea. All right, you've suffered enough. Let's cover some recommendations in the mailbag and get out of here. Recommendations. Things that I'm playing, watching, reading, enjoying, or not. Here's scorecard for the last couple weeks. Becky and I watched Starship Troopers, like a lot of people, I think, over the last couple weeks, because there's a new game called Helldivers 2 that has blown up, like a relatively low budget PS5 game, simultaneously released on the PC, and was seeing numbers like 400,000 concurrent players just in the Steam version. So overnight success. Helldivers 2, Starship Troopers, dystopian themes, for sure. The book, Starship Troopers, is based on a book in the 40s. And the book, I'm told, was kind of like, space Nazis, but not in a satirical way. Like, the author had some affinity for like fascism. And then, I never know how to pronounce Paul V. The guy who made RoboCop, I think, made the Starship Troopers movie. He did not get very far in the book before he was like, this is bullshit. This is fascist garbage. And so he made it sort of a satire or a parody, right? Of like, this is, and now the funny thing is, so Starship Troopers is indeed a satire. And it's also an over-the-top action film. And as Nuance is dead, and it's not newly dead, Nuance has been dead in America for quite some time. Even like contemporaneous reviewers at like really highbrow outlets bashed Starship Troopers the movie for being seemingly pro-fascist, even though they failed. That was them failing to recognize it was satire. Plenty of just bros, just the guys just who love the red-blooded just gore and guts and violence and all that nonsense. There wasn't a lot out that quarter at the movie theaters for them, and they love Starship Troopers completely unironically as a glorification of violence and stuff. And they just were happy to miss the point because it was really over the top. So now there's this game, Helldivers 2, second verse, same as the first. It's literally I'll share the launch trailer in the notes. Literally in the launch trailer, you're jokingly like for swearing allegiance to managed democracy. Like, there's voting happening, but somebody's pulling the strings, but it's for our benefit, right? It's beat for beat the same tone as Starship Troopers. You get to pick a ship name from like Mad Libs. I haven't played the game yet. I'm looking forward to playing it once I clear my backlog a little bit. But I'm told you pick a ship name that's kind of like Mad Libs, and my favorite one that I heard somebody picked was the Progenitor of Family Values, and it's like a gigantic goddamn spaceship carrier. Just imagine that sort of. Anyway, Helldivers 2 might play that soon. Starship Troopers, it holds up as being just the most mid-90s fucking mid-budget sci-fi, like from a production value perspective. I quite enjoyed that. Next up, Game Dev Story is what I thought was an iOS game, because it came out in 2008 or 9 or 10 or something like that, from Kairosoft on iOS. It was a simulation game where you could be like a game developer and you could start a little studio, and it's just you and a couple people at first, and then you grow into bigger and bigger offices where it's 6 and then 8 and then whatever number of people. And it roughly tracks, like, because you're covering years of ground as you make, because games take a long time to make. You pick the genre, you pair it with the type of game, like you could make a pirate puzzle game. And certain combinations work well and some others don't. And you got to manage the finances, and production runs long. And so years pass in the game. And as the years pass, the new, game consoles come out, and you have to like sign licensing agreements to those game consoles, and you could choose winners and losers. And of course, like some of them are very successful, and they are clearly going to be successful. So it makes a lot more sense to make games for those platforms. Then there's one like the Virtual Boy, which is a famous failure of Nintendo's, and even when they introduce it into the game, they're like, this one doesn't look like it's going to be very successful. And you could make games for it anyway, and then proceed to be not very successful in the game. So if you follow the game industry at all, it's a fun little game. I played it when it came out in the late 2000s. It was one of my favorite iPhone games, and I was looking for something just to play on my iPad before I fell asleep, and I pulled it back up and started playing it, and I learned two things. One, Kairosoft, the company that made that game, actually made Game Dev Story in the late 90s for Windows, and it was just Japanese only. And they'd been at it for a while, and that was just their first ever localized game. So it was the first one that I saw, which makes it even more impressive, frankly. It's such a good port and translates so well to touch controls. I mean, it's silly now. If you play it now, like it's not super fluid and nice, but it totally serviceable. And now they release like games of this ilk, like ramen shop simulator or movie set producer simulators, multiple a year, 3, 4, 5 a year, to the point that there's a guy on YouTube who literally will do like the 2023 ranking of Kairosoft simulator games. And so I assume this gets old, but then again, I already played Game Dev Story twice, and here I am a third time, and I'm just happily clicking along and watching numbers go up. So if you view it sort of as like an idle game or a clicker, I guess the retheming is probably all people really need. So if that sounds interesting to you, earlier I was saying there's no such thing as a good iPhone game. There is, of course. There's just not very many of them. So yeah, check those out. Once I'm done with this one, I might go and give some of the newer ones a look. Becky and I started the Weird Al movie. I think it's called it's called Weird. The Al Yankovic story. And I just wanted to mention it because it was exclusive to the Roku streaming service for a long time, but it's now available for rent on Apple TV. So we started that last night. Immediately loved it. Daniel Radcliffe plays Weird Al. He can't play an instrument and he can't sing like Weird Al, so they just cut the camera pretty aggressively. But what I love, just absolutely love the conceit of it, because I hate biopics. I as a format, as a genre, they're so goddamn boring. They're so hyper dramatic. They're just you really have to love following the celebrity that the biopic is about to really like it. The only ones that ever move the needle for me are about like historic. They're more like historical biography films, I suppose. But yeah, biopics, Johnny Cash or whatever the fuck. Like I noped out after about 10 minutes. Where Weird Al did parodies of songs, this biopic is so Weird Al did songs as parodies of songs. This biopic is a parody of biopics. And the tropes are just cranked up to 11 right out the gate. And unlike Starship Troopers, it actually does beat you over the head with, there's no way this is what his dad really said at the dinner table when he was a child, right? Or there's no ways, he'd fall for this or whatever. Like, it's very, very over the top. But so is Weird Al, and it's just fucking hilarious. I mean, you got to be in the right mood for it, and you got to be like into that kind of humor. But like, he signed up some like pretty awesome comedians who I'm sure, because Weird Al strikes me as a guy who probably he's probably pretty straight edge. He probably doesn't party hard. I can't imagine you being a professional musician and active for like 40 plus years and still look as good as he does. If you're not just, it looks like good, clean living. And in the process, he seems to have a reputation in the industry where people love him. So like the number of cameos that they shove into this thing are just hilarious. And a lot of them are comedians like Will Forte is standing in a room with Weird Al playing a record executive, just ripping Weird Al as Daniel Radcliffe, a new asshole about how much he sucks, and watching Weird Al, the human, kind of like start to squirm a little bit, be like, whoa, easy up here. Just the great chemistry. I'm sure that was like a fun scene to shoot. So yeah, Weird Al, check it out. Weird, an Al story. Only other recommendation. This is a pre-commendation because it's not out yet, but April 11th, Amazon is releasing Fallout, which they hope to be their second good TV show after The Boys / Gen V. Come at me. Speaking of over-the-top violence that's meant to be satire, but then now we got a whole fucking generation of Nazi kids who think that Homelander's a good guy. Ugh. Anyway, second good show from the people who brought us Westworld, which was a real good idea and a good season. I'll give it that. First season. But Jonathan Nolan, who's like one of my favorite screenwriters, he wrote Interstellar, which might be my favorite movie. Interstellar took a village, right? Like that was Kip Thorne, and like it has its whole legacy. But anyway, Jonathan Nolan, I like a lot. Fallout is the series. Amazon is releasing it. The Westworld people are writing it. It is a lighter heart and more comedic, but still relatively dark theme. If you know the video game series of Fallout, like you should already be excited because this looks just fucking rad. So there's a new trailer. I'll show you the new trailer. It is tonally like Fallout was always held back as a game by its ability to express the pop culture especially, but there's the cultural references that it was making, where it's a retro future 1950s dystopia. So I couldn't be more excited for this. This is looking great. I first played Fallout 2 in the late 90s because we had a friend who was older than us, my brother and I, and he had a copy, and the box for Fallout 2 said there was a brothel in every town. And I was like, you know what I've never been to is I am a 13-year-old boy. I've never been to a brothel. I should go check that out. And so sure enough, there's a lot of real dirty shit in Fallout 2 to spoil innocent minds with really, low resolution pixel art. There's nothing to see there. It's not, I'm sure it's lewd in a sense thematically, but a lot of drug use, stuff like that. More the drug use than anything. Of course, a lot of violence. Yeah, I don't know. If Fallout 2 was probably the most adult game that I'd played up to that point in my life, and I was like, this is kind of neat. So yeah, Fallout is nice. It's much more mainstream now, I suppose. Mailbag. Let's move on. Okay, so checking out the mailbox and the emails I've yanked. If you have not yet written into the podcast, I would love for you to write in. I'd like to hear from you. to know you exist, whether or not you're in Argentina or some other country where this podcast is also available. You can do that by emailing podcast@searles.co. And I will read every email, and I will reply to most emails, and I will read on the air a subset of those prior two groups of emails. All right. First up, Spencer. Subject, podcast length. And I probably grimaced when I first saw this, but then he went on to say, "Hi, Justin. I like your podcasts. You don't need to make them any shorter. Thanks, Spencer." Thank you, Spencer. That's reassuring. I'm in my own head about that at this point, so that's helpful. Next one is by a person named Ronan. I'm Ronan, longtime listener and streaming audience member, first-time writer. First of all, good job on the podcast. It is ranty, way too Apple obsessed, but fine for walking the dog or vacuuming. Exactly like me. This is Justin again, interjecting here. It's a longer email than I'm usually reading on these podcasts, but it's positive, so here we go. Being fine for walking the dog or vacuuming is exactly what I'm going for. So this is very, this is a product market fit, so to speak. Back to Ronan. It is always engaging and very well produced, which gives me hope for myself. And the jingle strikes a perfect balance of Nintendo-like catchiness and irritating out-of-placeness, which I believe is exactly what you were shooting for. Well done. Well, Ronan, congratulations, because I feel extremely seen right now. Yeah, and even calling this well-produced, it's similar to Webpack and using a menagerie of JavaScript tooling to ship a very basic, application. And how that's overkill and leads to other problems and knobs to twists and so forth, and just ways things can go wrong, I suppose. This is a super simple setup. I am just talking into a pretty basic microphone. It's nice, but it's not super nice. Plugged into over an XLR microphone cable into a deck, and that's plugged into USB-C, and it just shows up as a normal audio device on my Mac. I am recording into QuickTime Player, just as, from the file menu, you go to audio recording, and that's it. And then once I get into to Logic Pro, Apple's DAW digital audio workstation program, I've got a template set up, where that took some fiddling. That was the only hard part in this whole thing, to get all of the plugins correct and the right order and the limiter and expander, and Gary Bernhardt helped me figure out a lot of that stuff. But now it's pretty much set it and forget it. And I don't have to go through every single little gulp and, mouth click, and duck those out individually. So in fact, anyone thinks this is well produced makes me very happy, because I am not, my turnaround time on new episodes is less than 30 minutes once I record it. Back to Ronan. Anyways, since you're looking for questions to answer and possibly ramps to launch into a rant from, man, this guy gets me. Here is one. My 14-year-old son and I will be visiting Japan for 2 weeks in late April. This will be our second trip, and this time we'll do the typical tourist loop from Tokyo to Hiroshima and back, passing through Kyoto and Osaka. Are there any tips, advice? Excuse me, this is Justin again. I apologize for today. I've been doing a lot of the NPR host thing where the broadcaster knows how to roll an R. And so whenever there's, pronouncing a Hispanic name, will code switch into an entirely different kind of overplayed accent. I'm doing that a little bit with Japanese words today. Back to Ronan. Are there any tips, advice, or recommendations that you would like to make? Any Justin Searles approved place to go, thing to see, or gastronomical specialty to try? Oof. All right. Thank you, Ronan. Thank you for the email. I I just wrote a newsletter, actually. So that's probably the first place to start. Is I published a newsletter. It's the newsletter is available at justin.searles.co/newsletter. And this month's topic was how to travel well, and with 4 stories of my travels in Japan and how I've taken to enjoying them. Now, your itinerary is locked in enough here that don't feel bad when one of my pieces of advice is go off the beaten track and don't do the typical tourist loop. But if you haven't done it, I mean, if it's your first time, do that loop. And now when we say it's a loop, if you're not familiar with Japanese geography, I'll crash course. That same professor with the beautifully tended garden of society comment would teach us that Japanese geography is 1 banana, 3 oranges, and then a whole bunch of grapes, where the banana is Honshu, the main island. The 3 oranges are, Hokkaido to the north, Shikoku centrally, and then Kyushu to the south. And the bunch of grapes is just all the little tiny islands. So when Ronan is referring to the kind of main typical tourist loop, he's referring to the Tokaido-sen Shinkansen bullet train track that runs from Tokyo and then hits a bunch of major stops like Yokohama, I would not name all of them. There's a lot of little stops along the way, but the major ones like Yokohama, Nagoya, very central, Osaka. You get to Kobe, of course, then moving on to, I don't know why I'm treating this like some sort of geography quiz for myself at this point. After Kobe, you'll see places like Himeji, and then Hiroshima after that, which is a bit further. And it'll go all the way out to, I guess technically after that, the line changes, but you can go all the way over to Fukuoka. And then from there, you transfer now into part of the Kyushu Shinkansen. So but the main loop, most people will go to Tokyo and then they'll take that train just to Osaka and back. The fact that Ronan plans to go all the way to Hiroshima makes him an overachiever, and he will be well rewarded for that, because Hiroshima is one of the best, even if you only stay for 1 night, one of the best places that anyone, especially anyone from the US, but really anyone from the West, ought to visit. The city was, of course, devastated by the atom bomb at the end of the war. They have a tremendous and gorgeous peace memorial and park that is massive. There's a ton of space for it. But they also have a permanent exhibition and a couple different exhibitions. One is more like kind of the political, geopolitics side of the bomb and why it's so important that we never experience nuclear war again in this world. And the other is focused squarely on the devastation that was laid waste to Hiroshima at the end of the war. And it is one of the most impactful. It's right up there with, like, if you've done the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., in terms of the emotions conveyed, the educational and like editorial judgments made in building a museum like that are very impressive, especially when it's targeting an international audience who might be coming at this from all sorts of different walks of life and levels of education and politics and so forth. It's really good. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but there's a handful of stories there. Even the tragedy that runs through it doesn't end with the bomb. There's the stories of the people who survive and then died. There's the stories of the one thing I will share is there's this one exhibit or one, I don't know, plaque, something, where it shows the devastation to the main central drag in Hiroshima and just how like almost every single thing burnt down or fell over. And the one or handful of houses that were fortunate enough to stand, these are ancestral homes that people had for a long, long time. The handful of homes that were left standing and the handful of residents who happened to have survived somehow while also residing in those homes. When it came time to rebuild the city, eminent domain, to build a thoroughfare, to build they have a wonderful streetcar system, they knocked those homes down. You know, no one meant any harm by it, but like modernization came to Hiroshima faster than the rest of the country because, like, you know, it had to be almost entirely rebuilt. So I remember leaving with this idea of like what it would have been like to actually have overcome this, survive somehow at great lengths, and then still like have some bureaucrat come and like bulldoze your house anyway to go and put in a streetcar. So yeah, Hiroshima's awesome. I could talk forever about just Hiroshima, but if you're going to Hiroshima, there's a place, you asked for a gastronomical thing to try. Hiroshima okonomiyaki is a little bit different than the okonomiyaki, which if you've never heard this term before, okonomiyaki is like kind of like a savory pancake with pizza, like a pizza's variety of toppings that you would put into pizza, but applied to a pancake-like thing. And it's a pretty, there's a lot of flex in the definition of what counts as okonomiyaki. Basically, any sort of batter with a griddle could somehow qualify. Osaka is best known for it. Osaka is sort of the platonic form of okonomiyaki. So if you only have it once, you should probably have it there. But if you're in Hiroshima anyway, there is this really funny building. It's 4 stories tall called Okonomimura, I think is the name. Mura means village. And it's 4 stories and like 19 different vendors who all make their own slightly different spin on okonomiyaki. Hiroshima okonomiyaki contains noodles. That's like kind of their big specialty, or their spin on it. And each of these stores does something different to try to differentiate themselves. And so if you get the chance to go, it closes relatively early, or at least it did a few years back. Great place to get an early dinner, maybe after the museum, and go to at least a couple different stations. Walk through the whole thing and check it out. Hopefully it's not at this point overrun with tourists. I don't know if it's, you know, like so many things, been decimated by virality on Instagram or TikTok, but it's a really cool place. You know, some of the places differentiate themselves on food. Some are like, one's like a baseball, multiple are just baseball fan group, okonomiyaki places, little tiny bars. These are all like, I'm talking like 4 to 12 seats. So if the one that interests you is full up, you can always just keep walking and you'll find something. Others that like, I think there might have been an Elvis one at one point. Anyway, that's my first and second Hiroshima recommendation. My third would be go to Miyajima the day after. You need a palate cleanser. So Miyajima is a beautiful island that is very close. It's like a local train ride, 45 minutes, and then you get on a ferry. And where the train lets you off, it's like you're basically on rails to go to the ferry, because it's almost the only reason anyone ever visits the town that's that particular stop. You take the JR ferry onto the island, and then it's, if you've ever, being a Michigander, I think of it as being very similar to Mackinac Island, where it is very touristy at this point. But that island is like really cool. There's a lot of traditional foods they're famous for, and by late April, we're probably out of season, but like they've got really good vendors that do yakikaki, or like grilled oysters over an open flame. So like, that's good. There's a lot of good food there, a lot of kind of fair food. They also have if you've ever seen the big red torii, the big red gate, or the emoji of it, or the one at Epcot, I believe it is based on the one at Miyajima. So that's out there in the distance. You can get a picture with that. Like Nara, deer are considered sacred there. So you can get a selfie with a deer. It won't be a problem. There's going to be a lot of them. There are a couple temples to visit. One or both are often being in some state of refurbishment or being rebuilt. But yeah, that's great. A great little 2-day trip. So if anyone's going to Japan, Hiroshima Miyajima is an excellent 1-2 punch. Anything else I'd say? Read the newsletter. I've talked a lot about travel already, and we're getting on. Let's see. Just double checking. I don't know, Ronan. If you have any follow-up, if Ronan or any of you are traveling to Japan soon, because I'm planning a trip right now, my working memory is loaded with Japan travel thoughts. I'm thinking about taking an adventure myself that if I take it, I'll talk about it later. But feel free to shoot me an email and ask. And that'll be at podcast@searles.co. All right. Still reading, still looking, trying to decide what I want to respond to. Kate asks, what does the Thanksgiving table and life in general look like for you 30 years from now? And what does it look like if something happens to So Kate was phrasing this question from personal experience. Something that she and her partner ask themselves often is, what does the Thanksgiving table and life in general look 30 years from now? And what does it look like if something happens to one of us? She goes on, we had many conversations about the tactical, like who do we leave our house to, and the philosophical, like 100 years from now, will anyone know we existed? How do we have a legacy? What is it? Why does that matter to us? That's all I snipped from the email, so I presume that somewhere else in that email she invited me to comment. That's as a intentionally child-free individual, despite a lot of pressure to have children, implicit and explicit, just existing in a world where, natural selection had a pretty strong bias towards reproducing because it's one of the things that it requires, and there's only a couple for a species to be successful. It's something where you have an opportunity to define what life means to you. And I think that people I know who were intentionally from a relatively young age deciding that they weren't going to have kids and who were express about it. Like I think I was 20. I think I was 20, maybe 21 when I told Becky I didn't want to have kids. We were dating at the time. Grappling with that at a relatively young age or early in adulthood gives one an opportunity to think about those sorts of... It raises a bunch of other questions, right? Like, what are we even doing here, right, on a basic level? If you're just kind of like, playing out the normal plot beats in a life, the game of The Sims, you follow through. It's like having a kid, my perception is you are staying so fucking busy that you have the luxury of not ever having a minute to experience existential dread, because there's always a practice to drive a kid to, or somebody who's sick and end up late, or somebody who needs something, or something you could be doing to be a better parent, or whatever the fuck. And so I got to front load a lot of my, who am I? What am I doing here? What's my goal in life? What am I here to get out of it? To the extent that my life matters, it was always clear to me that the meaning that I gave my life was something that I could give it. And I might be able to convince others of my life's meaning, but that was outside my control. And so it's not the thing that I ever wanted to hang my hat on. But like I was working through a lot of that stuff. I'm very blessed to have been working through a lot of that stuff in my late teens and early 20s because I was so intentional about this and so certain I didn't want to have kids. I joke that I'm just like too selfish or so good at entertaining myself, or there's so many things I want to do that kids would get in the way of that. But I'm grateful that it lent itself to me working out a lot of the philosophical stuff early. Whereas I know some parents who are recent empty nesters, and it's like their marriage was defined by having kids, and now they got to rediscover each other, or maybe they do and it's no longer a fit, or maybe it's the first time that they've really thought about like, so what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And that's got to be tough. And I'm really glad that I got to think about that shit early on. Without giving any specific answers, I think the primary thing is the time and space to think through all of that. I do think about legacy a lot. A story I've told many times is I think about intellectual legacy a lot more than people who have kids, I imagine. In Plato's Symposium, they talk about intellectual legacy as being, and I'll explain, intellectual legacy as being somehow superior to genetic legacy. So if you have a kid, yes, your brood will carry on your genes and your blood. But after a single generation, they'll forget you. But if you can have an idea and perpetuate that idea, then you can exist even after you're dead in a much broader basis and a much stickier way for some period of time afterwards. And if you're really lucky, and I don't think Symposium goes so far as to say, but I remember me taking away from this. If you're really lucky, some idea that you have will exist as a striation in the sandstone of human existence. It'll be one line of, if you were to excavate our history and who we are and what our culture is, we're pretty high up from, it always feels like you're at the top because it's always being added. But at the time, surely there's somebody who's having the first, very basic philosophical concepts are emerging. Very basic language is being invented. Here, there's less to invent, but there's still plenty. And I'm sure if there's trillions and trillions of humans someday and we're all spacefaring, all of our contributions at this point will be so much more impactful relative to the number of humans who came after us. Just like if we would have been one of only tens of thousands of Greeks, 10,000 years ago. So I visualize my contribution in those terms and on that scale, not in an arrogant way, not to say that what I've got to offer is so amazing, but to say if I can just, the Steve Jobs put a dent in the universe comment. If I can just have moved the needle in some meaningful way, would I sleep better at night? No, I'm fine. I'm happy. Would I, on my deathbed, think yes, it was all worth it? No, because I'm not particularly motivated around self-sacrifice. I don't want to be a martyr. I don't organize my life that way. But would the act of having pushed myself to contribute something so meaningful, however that looks for you or for me, I think pushing myself to do that leads to good outcomes. And so I enjoy the journey that it's put me on to try to be the first person to think of something, or the first person to build a thing that does a certain thing. Or maybe not the first, but the first to articulate it in a way that breaks through for a certain group of people at a certain moment of time. And even if the idea isn't necessarily attributed to me, I know people's names get forgotten, right? But if the winds are blowing slightly differently, if it's a butterfly effect thing where something that I contributed meaningfully had a big enough ripple in the pond of human existence that ripple can be felt much later. It's worth striving for if you think you can have a positive impact. And it's about the striving for me. It's that visual isn't about the outcome. It's not about measuring how great a man I am or anything like that, or how I'll be remembered in the statue that'll go up and stand the test of time. None of that. It's all just about, boy, it's nice to strive. And it's nice to feel alignment around the things that you are pursuing mastery over individually, the self-improvement that you seek in your life, and the potential for that impact to outlast you as a North Star to help set your direction. So I think a lot about legacy in those terms. I don't think like consciously about it anymore, because this is a conversation I was having with myself in Philosophy 101 as a 19-year-old. But, I think software is an amazing analogy to this, because already the DHH using the Windows Linux subsystem, he is saying Windows is good now as an operating system because it's fundamentally Linux. And Linux and BSD, the two kind of open source Unix kernels that we use now in virtually 100% of consumer electronics, anything with a computer. Those tools, it's not just the kernel, but like those programs like cat, echo, the very many small programs, just like the ancient Greeks, like whoever was just happening to work at AT&T or whatever, probably contributed a lot of programs, or whoever, whether it was like MIT working on, what became GNU Linux, or somebody over in California in what became BSD. People contributed in the early days, things that made a massive impact, but they were also, like, the flip side is they were so obvious as to be essential. Like cat literally just prints out what's in a file. Like if I hadn't been the one to invent that, somebody else would. And here we are now in the history of software, 30 years of that sort of erosion and sandstone kind of building up, and the stack keeps building on top. And it really is, the analogy is it holds too well. I wish that we threw everything away in software and started fresh and from first principles just built a new fucking computer. And maybe quantum computing will be that, and we will discard a lot of this someday. But for now, it sure as fuck feels like if I contribute something meaningful either to open source or to how people write open source or to how people write software, such that the demand for the kind of tools that they would want are meaningfully moved, and that is to say, influencing what kind of open source software falls into that stack in the future, I don't necessarily need to be able to run a command and then see my name and a copyright logo as part of some program, as part of like a Linux distribution that's on every Raspberry Pi and every Mac and every car and every toaster. But it's interesting to think about as a, what do we really have to show for all the software as a human project and endeavor? What is lasting? And our individual web apps, whether we run them 24/7 or just on weekdays during business hours, that's all going to be gone. But the core technologies and the tools and the shared stuff is as good of an encapsulation of like what is a cultural project as the pyramids, right? Or as some sort of it's a commons. And being able to contribute to that, and whether it's through code or through changing minds, it's a very satisfying opportunity. It's a very satisfying thing to spend time on. And I, in many ways, in terms of publishing open source and maintaining open source and communicating with people about open source, I feel like I've kind of run my race, at least for now. And I've got other stuff I want to build that's more of the transient variety, or of the, I want to have an impact on people outside of software per se or software as such. And I want to instead have an impact on, with Becky about like, maybe fitness or mindset, or maybe with, future users of an app that I want to build around like language acquisition. That's where I want to contribute to next. So that's a lot of thoughts. I think we should probably end there because this is easily the longest podcast yet. So I really set out to talk less, but I didn't get enough sleep. And so that's on you for voting for whoever you voted for, who doesn't think that we should have daylight savings time around the whole calendar year. And maybe you support permanent daylight savings time. I shouldn't, that should be the number one issue in this coming election. It's just too bad we've got 800 things that are more important than this, but it is indeed why I am quite sleepy. And so I am going to go take a nap, and maybe you should too, unless you're driving. Don't take a nap yet. Wait till you pull over, take a nap, and I will see you at the next version.